Mr. Motz had a motion that he wanted to address. Perhaps I'll start by opening this meeting. Welcome to meeting number 16 of the Special Joint Committee on the Declaration of Emergency, established pursuant to the Order of the House of Commons of March 2nd, 2022, and the Order of the Senate, March 3rd, 2022. Today's meeting will take place according to a hybrid formula pursuant to the Senate and House of Commons orders. In case of any technical difficulty, please let me know so we may suspend the sitting for a few moments so all members may fully be able to take part in this meeting. Please note that interpretation is available. You will see a globe icon at the bottom of your screen. Actually, there are no virtual witnesses this evening, and I believe you're all here, so you can set that last comment aside. And from what I gather, given the witnesses being here, there were no sound checks done, Madam Clerk. There are no problems, therefore, in that regard. Before we move to today's orders of the day, you have a motion that you wanted to present that you sent to us a few moments before the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Based on the responses we got back from the Law Clerk and Parliamentary Counsel for the House of Commons, and the Law Clerk and Parliamentary Counsel for the Senate and the Committees on Legislative Services Directorate, in light of they put together some information on the rights of committees to procure responses to oral questioning. And in response to that, I move the following motion: that the committee, having considered the October 24th, 2022 briefing note prepared by appropriate experts of the Senate and House of Commons concerning the rights of committees to procure evidence from witnesses, directs the joint chairs to read the following statement to witnesses at the beginning of their appearance before this committee. Given their constitutional nature, and this is in quotes the notice that we are proposing to have read to all the witnesses from here moving forward. And I quote, "Given their constitutional nature, a committee's power supersedes statutory law and other privileges, including cabinet confidences and solicitor-client privilege. When questioning witnesses beyond the general requirement of relevance to the subject being studied by a committee, there is no specific evidence rule limiting the nature of questions that may be asked to a witness during committee work. Witnesses must answer the questions put to them truthfully. When a witness raises concerns about answering a question or refuses to answer, it is in that committee's sole discretion to determine whether any reasons for withholding information should be accepted."
Quelqu'un veut intervenir?
Thank you. Are there any comments on Mr. Motz's motion? Ms. Bendayan, I believe. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I see that the bells are ringing. I just noted that they are. And, Mr. Chair, I'd like to propose this. Following last week's meeting, it seemed as though everyone agreed with my suggestion that we begin our work. We have 4 witnesses here before us today. I don't understand why we would once again be having a debate on motions. In fact, a motion we received only half an hour ago. I propose we adjourn the debate on this motion so we may begin our substantive work.
Une motion d'adjournement.
A motion for adjournment? I think we can discuss the adjournment motion raised by. There is no debate on the adjournment motion to adjourn. It's a dilatory. Okay. So we'll vote on Madame Bendayan's motion to adjourn. So to adjourn Mr. Motz's motion specifically. You may start, Madame Burke.
Alors, on fait le vote sur l'adjournement du débat du proposition de. The Honourable Senator Boniface. L'Honorable Senator Carignan CP. No. The Honourable Senator Harder.
Yes.
The Honourable Senator Patterson.
Agreed.
Non.
Agreed.
Madame Bendayan.
Oui.
Mr. Naqvi. Yes.
Mr. Varani,
Yes.
Mr. Brock,
No.
Mr. Moss.
No.
Yeas pour 7, nays contre 4, 4.
Merci. Alors,
Thank you. So the debate on Mr. Mott's motion is adjourned. You will all have noticed that the bells are have rung, and it'll take 26 minutes before the vote is called. I would propose that we hear from one or two witnesses. They each have 5 minutes for their opening statements, and then we could adjourn to go vote. Mr. Motz, I hear you saying yes, so you agree with what I'm saying? No, it was about something else. Mr. Brock, you wanted to say something on that?
It's been clarified.
OK.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Chair, given the fact that each witness has 5 minutes worth of presentations, we have over 20 minutes for the votes. Can we not just move ahead to hear from as many witnesses as... That's what I was proposing, Madam Bendayan. We will be hearing from the witnesses, and 15 minutes before the vote, I will adjourn. It doesn't take us 15 minutes to vote, Mr. Chair. Oh, I hear that there are people who want to vote in the House, Madam Bendayan. So there are 4 witnesses. I'm not sure what order you want to go ahead with. Mr. Fleury, you can start. Good day.
Members, thank you for inviting me to assist to committee's work and reviewing the declaration of the Emergencies Act. I've been a city councillor for Rideau Vanier ward since 2010. The western boundary of my ward runs along the Rideau Canal to the Chateau Laurier. Parliament and many other federal institutions that were the focus of the protest borders the neighborhoods of Sandy Hill, Lower Town, and Vanier, which was the areas hardest hit by the occupation. Je dispose de quelques minutes pour faire.
I have a few moments to share my remarks with you. I wanted to use this time to inform the committee of the impacts and repercussions of the protests on residents and businesses in downtown Ottawa.
The impact to residents in my community were unbearable and severely impacted the well-being, the livability, and the safety, and forced many businesses to close during the occupation. Upon its arrival, the Freedom Convoy occupation had devastating impacts on our residents and businesses. This was initially felt from unbearable noise. The protesters used trucks horn and train horns almost constantly, day and night. Fireworks further added to the constant barrage of noise. The impact of the horns was traumatizing for residents living in my area and those living in the neighboring ward of Somerset. At the Public Order Emergency Commission, residents testified as to how the noise had a detrimental impact on their mental health and emotional health. Severe sleep deprivation was common. These conditions made downtown unlivable. Aujourd'hui encore, certains continuent de...
Yet, still today, some continue to suffer from the trauma of this experience. These concerns were communicated to me at the time through hundreds of emails and phone calls I received from affected residents and businesses. The trucks parked on our streets not only had an impact because of their constant noise and fumes, but they also created a chaotic environment by the way they were parked, which gave the impression of a fortress. These trucks were used as weapons in this context.
Of my ward during the protest, I can tell you that the streets of downtown Ottawa were in complete chaos. I witnessed open fires in the streets, the delivery of tanks of fuel to protesters in close proximity to residents and businesses. At the intersection of Rideau and Sussex, right beside the Senate building, protesters set up DJ booths and barbecues. I also saw large trucks driving on residential streets and, in some instances, driving in the wrong direction. In the Byward Market, which is also in my area, many pickup trucks parked everywhere, including on sidewalks, without any consequences. No tickets, no towing. Aside from occupying space in our city and on our walkways, these trucks served another purpose. They represented an assault on our communities through aggressive and intimidating behavior by people participating in the occupation, which created an environment of chaos and lawlessness. The chaos forced numerous businesses and institutions in the area to close. This included the Rideau Centre, the Rideau Library Branch, the University of Ottawa, the Andrew Fleck Child Care Centre, and many others. The Rideau Centre has historically never had to close more than a day a year. The centre was closed for 24 consecutive days due to this occupation. This means 300 stores, more than 1,500 part-time employees who were unable to generate income. Each day for the Rideau Centre, this represented a loss of revenue of $2 million for the businesses. The closure of the Rideau Centre also compounded effects on the surrounding Rideau streets and the Byron Market. Small and independent businesses were severely impacted. Most businesses on Rideau Street and in the Byron Market were forced to close. Although lockdown restrictions were no longer in effect, most of these businesses could not stay open. Groups of protesters were demanding to dine indoors at local restaurants in violations of public health measures and orders. The businesses faced stark choices: close entirely, confront protesters and ask them to leave, or serve them in violation of public health regulations. Many opted to close out of fear. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Monsieur Fleury.
Thank you, Mr. Fleury. I forgot to mention, as you notice, I have this yellow card here that states that you have 1 minute left. And when you have a minute left, I'll certainly be flagging you so that you know how much time you have left. Mr. Fleury, thank you. Let's move to Mr. Steve Kanellakos.
I thank the committee and its members for inviting me to assist in this important review of the use of the Emergencies Act. Tonight I plan to cover a little bit about my background and a few areas that have been the subject of interest, certainly from the public inquiry that I just testified on Monday. By way of background, I currently serve as the City Manager of the City of Ottawa. I've held that position since May 2016. Prior to becoming City Manager, I served as Director General of the Ottawa-Carleton Regional Police Service, which was a predecessor to the Ottawa Police Service. I left policing and joined the City of Ottawa in 2000 as the General Manager of Emergency and Protective Services. I then had various roles within the city before becoming the City Manager. I want to begin by providing the committee with a brief sense of my role and responsibilities as City Manager. The City of Ottawa has 10 departments. Each of those departments has a General Manager who reports directly to me. The City Manager is directed by City Council through the various bylaws and resolutions which delegate the City Manager with various powers and responsibilities. In turn, I delegate Council's requests to the 10 General Managers that support me, and in this role I have oversight over Mr. Kim Ayot, to my left, who's the General Manager of Emergency and Protective Services. I want the committee to understand that the Ottawa Police Service was the lead agency for the response to the Freedom Convoy. It was in charge of making operational and tactical decisions in response to the convoy. The city's role, meanwhile, was to support the Ottawa Police Service as required and manage city services to minimize the impact of the protest on those services. When the convoy arrived, ticketing and towing of large trucks inside the control zone was not pursued by the city. The OPS, Ottawa Police, was concerned that enforcing bylaws in the control zone could trigger violence. The city also could not independently decide to close some streets because OPS was the lead agency and we were part of an integrated management system. In addition to managing city operations during the protest, I also engaged in negotiations with the protesters at the request of Ottawa Police. On February 8, 2022, I received a call from Deputy Chief Bell of the Ottawa Police Service. He told me that members of the Ottawa Police Service Police Liaison Team were coming to my office. He said the PLT, the acronym for Police Liaison Team, wanted to discuss a potential meeting with some of the protesters. I attended the meeting and was told that OPS negotiations with protesters had broken down. I was advised that the protesters wanted to meet a senior city official and asked whether I would attend such a meeting. I agreed to meet with the protesters on the advice of and with the support of OPS Senior Command. The PLT suggested that I ask the protesters to remove trucks from some neighborhoods in return for a meeting with the mayor. Later that day, I met with some of the protest leaders. I advised them that the mayor might consider meeting with the protest leaders if the protesters moved trucks out of the residential areas. Members of the PLT were present for part of that meeting. After the meeting, I briefed the mayor and his chief of staff on the general principles that were discussed in that meeting. I had subsequent calls with OPS Senior Command on February 11th with Chief Slowly and 13th with Chief Slowly, Acting Deputy Chief Ferguson, and Deputy Chief Bell to update them on the status of the city's discussions with protesters. Everyone agreed that getting protesters out of residential areas would be positive for residents and reduce the footprint of the protesters. I attended another meeting with protesters and Mr. Ayat on February 13th to discuss the logistics of moving trucks out of the neighborhoods. Acting Superintendent Rob Drummond accompanied us. OPS Senior Command had assigned him to negotiate the details and conditions of the move. Throughout the ensuing days, the mayor, through his chief of staff and a third-party facilitator, Mr. Dean French, entered into discussions with protesters to remove some trucks from the downtown core. Our efforts resulted in approximately 40 heavy trucks and an unknown number of light trucks and vehicles moving out of the residential areas. At around the same time we were successfully moved these trucks, the federal government invoked the Emergencies Act. To my knowledge, the city never requested the invocation of the act. That said, and in closing, the Freedom Convoy had a significant impact on our city's services and its residents. It was the first time the protesters used heavy trucks to parallel, and I thank you for inviting me here today.
Merci, Monsieur Canet.
Thank you, Mr. Kanellakos. There are about 15 minutes left before the vote, actually 16 minutes. So I will.
Order. We have a voting app exactly to facilitate voting. It takes 90 seconds. We can do that from this room.
Je comprends, Monsieur Virani, mais
I understand, Mr. Virani.
we don't need them for quorum.
je
I
comprends,
propose
Monsieur
that we
Virani,
continue
mais
this meeting.
j'ai déjà,
I understand, Mr. Virani.
Upstairs, Monsieur Fortin.
j'ai déjà statué là.
I've already ruled on that, Mr. Virani. Just right before you spoke, Madame Bendayan raised it, and I understand. But there are people who want to go upstairs.
2 minutes to go upstairs, Mr.
Je
Fortin.
comprends, mais je.
I understand, but we have to give them time to do so. So I'm be adjourning the meeting.
Your ruling, let's
Okay.
have a vote on that ruling.
Alors, passer un vote. Ma proposition est d'ajouter.
All right, so let's vote. My proposal is to adjourn 15 minutes.
Seconds so we can vote online. Considering Monsieur Fortin
Given Mr. Fortin the fact that almost everyone.
days has emphasized the need to get on with the work of this committee, let's get on with the work of the committee.
On est tous d'accord.
We all agree with the idea, Mr. Virani, to move ahead with our work, but I have to make sure that everyone can vote. But you challenged my decisions, Madam Clerk. Mr. Clerk?
The question on the challenge of the chair is, shall the ruling of the chair be sustained? And the ruling would be to adjourn the meeting. The Honourable Senator Boniface. Abstention. Shall the ruling of the chair be sustained? L'Honourable Senator Carignan, CP. The Honourable Senator Harder. The Honourable Senator Patterson.
Mr. Fortin.
Oui.
Mr. Green.
Oui, oui.
Madame Bendayan.
No.
Mr. Nakvi.
No.
Mr. Virani.
No.
Mr. Brock.
Yes.
Mr. Motz.
Yes.
Yeas pour 5, 5. Nays contre 3, 3.
Alors, la rencontre est ajournée.
So we will be adjourning until the vote is complete. Suspend, rather. I keep saying adjourned. I mean suspend. We'll be resuming right afterwards with our last two witnesses who'll be making their statements then. Thank you. 6:52, and now it's 22 past. So the meeting may close at 10 if there are no objections to that. That's what I will consider the will of the committee. So let's move ahead. Mr. Ayotte, you have the floor. 5 minutes.
Merci. Good evening, Chair, and to the committee. Thank you for inviting me here today.
I look forward to answering your questions and assisting the committee in whatever way I can. I'm the General Manager of Emergency and Protective Services for the City of Ottawa. As such, I oversee approximately 2,500 staff. I'm supported by the City's Director of Public Safety Service, the Director of Bylaw and Regulatory Services, the Fire Chief, and the Fire of the Paramedic Service, all of whom report directly to me. Previously, I was the Chief of the Ottawa Fire Services before being promoted to my current position. As the General Manager of Emergency and Protective Services, I report to the City Manager, Steve Kanalakis. Before I answer your questions, I thought I could best assist the committee by providing it with an overview of the City's Emergency Operations Center, or the EOC. The EOC was central to the City's efforts during the Freedom Convoy. The EOC receives information from all City departments and convenes and monitors emergency situation once the situation is brought to our attention. During an emergency situation, the EOC status may escalate from monitoring to enhanced, from enhanced to activated, and then from activated to a state of emergency. This exact progression took place during the Freedom Convoy. The EOC is staffed by duty officers from each of the city's departments. The EOC operates under the oversight of the Emergency Operations Center Control Group, which is chaired by the City Manager, Mr. Kanalakis. The City is also a member of the National Capital Region Command Center, or the NCRCC. The NCRCC includes representatives from the RCMP, OPP, Ottawa Police Services, Parliamentary Protective Services, and Parliamentary Protective Services. The NCRCC acts as an area command during an active multi-agency police operation in the region. The NCRCC was mobilized on January 28, 2022 to respond to the Freedom Convoy. The Ottawa Police Service led the NCRCC Incident Command, and thus the lead agency during the protest in Ottawa. With that structure in mind, I want to now turn to the city's role during the Freedom Convoy. The handling of the Freedom Convoy fell within the incident management of the Ottawa Police Service. The city's role and mine was support the OPS to mitigate the impacts of the protest on residents and businesses. The goal of the city was to get the convoy in and out of the city as soon as possible. To this end, we responded to the operational decisions made by the Ottawa Police. For example, on January 29, 2022, the Ottawa Police instructed bylaw officers to not ticket or tow vehicles in the red zone without police approval. Later, bylaw officers and other city personnel and services were directed not to enter the hot zone or the red zone without police escort due to safety concerns. Despite our efforts and those of Ottawa Police, the protests had a grave impact on our city's communities and social services. Bus routes had to be rerouted, and some individuals receiving care at home had to be relocated. The city also had to work with convoy organizers to maintain an emergency lane throughout the downtown for emergency service vehicles throughout the relevant period. The city experienced both setbacks and successes throughout this period. From my perspective, the city learned some valuable lessons from the convoy demonstration. The city's response to Rolling Thunder is a prime example. Before the Freedom Convoy occurred, the city did not install traffic barriers after it was advised not to by Ottawa Police. However, when we became aware of the Rolling Thunder protest, we worked with Ottawa Police to block roads to the downtown core based on knowledge gained from the Freedom Convoy. In the future, I suspect that these types of efforts will be invaluable in preventing an event like the Freedom Convoy from occurring again. I am pleased to be here today to share the lessons learned with you. I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you very much.
Still have a minute. OK. Merci. Alors,
Thank you. There's been a special request from Mr. Watson. He's asking for 10 minutes for a presentation. As far as I'm concerned, I have no objection. If everyone agrees, Mr. Watson, you have 10 minutes. You have the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, members of the Senate, members of the House of Commons, senators. It's a pleasure to be here.
18 days and 4 hours and 3 minutes and 2 seconds. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you. I recently appeared before Justice Rouleau and the Public Order Emergency Commission on October 18, 2022. I strongly believe and hope that the important work done by the Commission and this joint committee will help prevent this city's residents and those of other Canadian cities from ever having to endure such a horrendous occupation. Au cours des 25 dernières années,
For the past 25 years, I've had the privilege of representing the residents of the City of Ottawa at Queen's Park and at the city.
The city's residents triumph over a number of extraordinary challenges, particularly as we all dealt with in our own communities COVID-19. In recent years in Ottawa, this included events like the record flooding of the Ottawa River in 2017 and 2019, which forced many nearby residents to evacuate their homes. In between the two floods, Ottawa and its surrounding areas were racked by a tornado that toppled power lines and homes. And as you may recall, just this summer, residents endured a thunderstorm that destroyed tens of thousands of trees and property throughout the region and left tens of thousands without power for days and, in many instances, weeks. The arrival of the truck convoy in January 2022 and the ensuing occupation of our city was another threat to the safety and security of our residents. Le service de police d'Ottawa et la
The Ottawa Police Service and the city worked well together on many occasions to protect the city in many crises over the years.
Started arriving in Ottawa in front of the Parliament buildings, in fact, on January 27, 2022. I recall seeing a few trucks parked on city streets while additional trucks arrived the following day. After the first weekend of protests, it became clear to me that Ottawa's police service had lost Wellington Street. A protest ended and an occupation began. Let me start by setting the table for MPs and senators and members of the public. Can you imagine a similar truck convoy demonstration taking over your downtown, city, or village? Can you imagine me showing up in your hometown with these demonstrators, rubbing shoulders with them, taking pictures of them, bringing them coffee and Timbits? Can you imagine how disgusting and disrespectful that would have been to your residents if their own community was under siege from the 24/7 noise and fumes over a 3-week period? As mayor, I was in regular communication with the OPS as requested throughout the time frame of the convoy. I understand almost immediately that the OPS required additional resources. On January 31st, I received a call from the Prime Minister. I explained that additional officers from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police were necessary. From then onward, I continued to push for assistance from our federal and provincial partners. On February 3rd, 2022, I spoke to Minister Mendicino and impressed upon him the need for additional resources. On February 7th, at the request of the Ottawa Police Services Board, my office was prepared and I co-signed a letter with the chair of the board seeking those additional resources. The letter was addressed to the Prime Minister, Minister Mendicino, Premier Ford, and Ontario Solicitor General Sylvia Jones. The purpose of the letter was very clear. Ottawa required more resources to bring an end to the protests. Ce geste est extraordinaire.
This would be extraordinary, as generally this type of request would be made by the Chief of Police to the RCMP and the Ontario Provincial Police.
In these letters, I was told the OPS was not successful in its request to obtain more police officers. At around the same time, I also declared a state of emergency in the City of Ottawa. While the declaration did not provide my office with any new substantial powers, I believe it was symbolically important. It relayed to our residents and to the country that the City of Ottawa was in fact under siege and could not end the occupation on our own. I also participated in meetings with our federal partners. As I mentioned previously, the province of Ontario regrettably declined to take part in this dialogue of the Tripartite Committee. In these meetings, I echoed our request for more police resources to support the OPS in its efforts to reclaim our city. As you know, on February 14, 2022, the Emergencies Act was invoked the first time since its passing in 1988. Although the federal government did not consult me on its use, I fully support it and fully support the introduction of the Emergencies Act. Up until that point, it was not clear to me that the earlier police efforts would be successful in bringing about a peaceful end to such a massive demonstration. I take this opportunity to remind honourable members of the Joint Committee that the combined presence of these vehicles, these hundreds of 18-wheelers and smaller vehicles, felt like an overpowering and threatening armada to the residents of Ottawa. Excuse me. I believe that the biggest challenge during the protests was the inability to move the trucks that embedded themselves on our streets. The Emergencies Act resolved this issue by forcing tow truck companies to provide towing vehicles. In the end, more than 1,800 officers, which we asked for, came to Ottawa under OPS command, including officers from the OPP, RCMP, and a number of municipal police forces from as far away as Alberta. Ottawa residents will be forever grateful to those men and women in uniform who came to the aid of our city and its unlawful occupation. The occupation of our city was a horrific experience for people who lived in the downtown core and was unlike anything our city has ever faced before. It affected those who work in the downtown core, call it home, our tourists who want to visit the Parliament buildings, and the local businesses who depend on the peace and stability for their livelihood. And it's had a long-lasting impact on some of our residents' mental and physical health and had a detrimental impact on our tourism industry. I want to share a few examples in conclusion. The Montfort Hospital, l'hôpital Montfort, qui est très important pour
The Montfort Hospital is very important to our community.
rooms nearby to avoid significant traffic delays, which ultimately affected their shifts over a 2-week stretch. It led to a steep decline in activity in the emergency room, which impacted their patients negatively. And 13 families who traveled to the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario for cancer therapy were impacted by the convoy and had to either delay or reschedule their treatment. CHEO's spokesperson described the occupation as, quote, unnecessary stress on top of what is already a stressful situation for kids and their families whose treatments are critical for their best outcomes, end quote. A local media outlet reported that on February 1st, an anonymous downtown resident had been, quote, living a nightmare in her home just minutes from Parliament Hill. Constant honking, noise outside her building, as well as the smell of diesel fuel had left her sleepless. Quote, it makes me so depressed and so sad that these people care so little about people like me or people who are disabled. The Public Order Emergency Commission heard the testimony of a legally blind resident on the downtown core that described the hardships she experienced during the occupation. This included difficulty getting around due to the constant noise, as well as hearing loss as a result of the extremely loud blaring of horns for days on end. The United Way for East Ontario and 35 of its social service agencies studied the impacts of the occupation on the vulnerable and marginalized communities. Most notably, the Distress Centre of Ottawa and region noted that more than half their calls during the 24-hour period were from residents in distress or in crisis. And additionally, and this is very, very sad, 12% of their clients had thoughts of suicide as a result of the events that unfolded. And yet, Ottawa's residents were as resilient as they had been in the past and will be in the future. Monsieur le Président, I now welcome any questions. Merci pour l'occasion de...
Thank you for this opportunity to share the point of view from the council members. Thank you.
Alors, on va maintenant passer au premier round de questions.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. We'll start with the first round of questions, 5 minutes each. Mr. Motz, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for being here. Deputy Chief Bell, when he was asked through the commission about the meeting with protesters, said, and I'll quote, I truly believed it took the temperature of the protests down, and that was a good outcome. And Mr. Kalakis, and I think that's how you say your name, is it? Kanalakis, close, thank you. You were on the ground. You were an elected or a city official that actually met with the protesters. Do you think it would have had an additional cooling effect if anyone from the federal government would have met with the main organizers, had heard their grievances, because after all, they were here to meet with government so that the federal government would hear their concerns with federal mandates and restrictions and how those were impacting their livelihoods. Do you think it would have had an impact on the protesters?
Mr. Chair, it's hard to speculate on whether it would have or not. That certainly was their objective. I mean, the objective when they met with me, when Ottawa Police brought them over, was they were quite clear about this. They felt that meeting with Mayor Watson ultimately, if they could fulfill their end of the bargain, would demonstrate and put pressure on other levels of government to be able to meet them, and that's what they were seeking. That was their ultimate goal.
And you're right, that was their ultimate goal. And unfortunately, I'm going to go to the statement that Mr. Mayor, your chief of staff, made, and there was a text sent back and forth to the Minister of Public Safety, and it said the following: I assume that you must. This is so from your chief of staff, Mr. Arpin, to Minister Mendocino. I assume that you must understand how spectacularly ridiculous the contention is that we could be meeting with them when your level of government trots out a number of ministers to denigrate the demonstrators and let them know that dialogue is impossible with this government of Canada, with the government of Canada, in the context of a demonstration targeting the government of Canada, but somehow we should divine that we should be meeting with them to make them feel heard. That's nauseating to say the least, but thanks for sharing, frankly. Mr. Watson, quick question to you. Those are the words of him. Would it be fair to say that that's reflective of how you felt at that time as well?
Thank you, Mr. Motz, for the question. Bottom line was we are all frustrated because this thing had gone on far too long. Temperatures were bubbling up at the surface, both with protesters and with government officials.
But the issue is about government not speaking with protesters.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I can't direct a federal minister to speak with anyone.
But it added to your frustration.
Well, look, I'm not sure.
Bottom line, Mr. Mayor, is they put you and Mr. Kanalakis in a spot where they expected you folks to act and meet with protesters rather than them.
No, because the
did.
arrangement. Sorry.
You did meet with them. Mr. Kanalakis met with them, and not the ministers, not anybody from government did.
No, but we had worked on an agreement that if they move trucks out of residential areas, which was my number one preoccupation, because
Right.
that was the annoyance and the frustration and the angst by the public with those trucks running 24 hours a day. If they followed 3 different conditions that are in the letter that I tabled with the commission, then I would meet with organizers.
And I understand that before the police operation took place, that there was an agreement in principle. So, Mr. Kanalakis, let me ask you this. As one of the only people willing to meet with them or able to meet with the protest organizers, did they seem agreeable and reasonable and respectful in their dialogues with you?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. The people I met with were reasonable and respectful towards. We had a respectful conversation.
Thank you. And I would assume that that's the expectation they had if they had been given the courtesy and respect to be met with by the government, which is why they came down here in the first place. Did you meet with? Let me ask you this way. Was this the only occasion that you were asked by someone from the federal government to meet with the protesters?
No, I was asked by Ottawa Police to meet the protesters.
Anyone from government?
No.
Okay. As one of the only people to meet with them, you saw firsthand what they were like. Do you think that they would have? In your opinion, Mr. Mayor answered the first time, but do you believe that they would have been in a position to vacate, to leave, had they been heard by government?
Une réponse rapide.
Quickly.
Oh, I'd say no, because they didn't have control over the entire group of people that were here in Ottawa, and that's why we ran into troubles when we were trying to move out the vehicle. Not everybody was part of their group and listening to them.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Motz. Mr. Naqvi, 5 minutes.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
First of all, thank you very much for your public service. I think you are the longest serving mayor of City of Ottawa, and you'll be congratulated on that. But also in that period, I think you mentioned 25 years of public service in different levels of government. You must have seen many protests that have taken place. How does this particular protest that we are talking about compare to what you have seen in your public life?
Thank you, Mr. Naqvi. Nothing compares to what we saw. This was extraordinary. We're very good at welcoming protesters to Ottawa, as you know, mostly to your riding, because they're here for Parliament Hill and the Supreme Court and other important buildings along Wellington Street. But at the end of the day, virtually all of the protests that I've seen over the 25 years I've been in public life in the City of Ottawa, people arrive, they protest, they give speeches, and then they move on. This was entirely different in terms of volume and in terms of the level of anger that you could see with people and the complete lack of respect by many of the individuals who came here and were involved in activities that were just despicable, and the harm that they did to people living in Centertown, because Centertown is a vibrant community, as is Lower Town, that represents by my friend Mathieu, the Byward Market, Overbrook Forbes by the baseball stadium. There were many, many documented examples of this kind of boorish behavior, urinating on the cenotaph, dancing on the tomb of the unknown soldier, stealing food from the Shepherds of Good Hope, putting placards and the mandate on the Terry Fox statue. I asked members of Parliament and senators, if this was happening in your community, would you tolerate it under the guise of free speech? Absolutely not. You can have free speech, but you can't destroy and start to destroy a neighborhood.
So you've never seen anything like that, what you just described. How did you feel when you saw some members of parliament, including now the leader of the opposition, going out there, buying coffee and taking photos with people who were disturbing the lives of the community and shut down the city?
The best way to describe that behavior is disrespectful to the people of Ottawa, particularly since the now leader of the opposition is an MP from Ottawa. So a lot of his constituents would have been individuals who lived in his ward and worked downtown, and much of downtown was shut down. We just got out of the lockdown as a result of COVID-19, and then the stores are finally starting to open, the restaurants are starting to open, and then there's another lockdown caused by the convoy. So it was not helpful at all to be mugging with selfie sticks and taking pictures with the convoy. Our city was hurting, and we needed some empathy and sympathy and not these kind of tactics.
Thank you. Mr. Fleury, I've got hundreds of emails that I got in my community office from residents and businesses who are hurting. What kind of issues, specific cases, if you can give some examples that you were hearing through your ward office as the local councillor?
Thank you, Member Nakvi. The range is very wide, so I'm only going to share a few examples. But as you know, Rideau Street is an important transit hub. It connects both local transit routes from the western part of Centertown and the eastern part of the city, connecting at the Rideau Centre with our light rail. Having to close those local routes added a number of pressures for folks to access. Some examples are hospitals, their workplaces. There were a number of situations like that where local businesses who wanted to open, the deliveries couldn't make it to that business. I spoke in my earlier statement about the issues of livability. You live beside the Parliament precinct, but that's your home, that's your city. You usually walk to your coffee shop, and you can't do that because there's noise, there's intimidation, there's aggression, and when you're in your own unit, it's not quiet. It's constant horn, constant smells. So on both your ability to travel, on your ability to do business, and on your ability to live safely as a city, we weren't able to uphold our responsibility for residents' well-being and safety.
Thank you. Mr. Kanalakis, I've got a few seconds left. Did the 311 call volume went up during that period? Is there a marked difference in terms of the calls?
Yes, we had over 18,000 calls, and at one point I thought that was double our normal volume, and I don't think it was quite double, but it was significantly higher.
And any sense of what kind of complaints you were receiving through 311 calls?
They were mostly the bylaw type calls, the nuisance calls, fires, fireworks, noise, parking issues, people urinating and using outdoor premises to go to the washroom. It was all kinds of those nuisance bylaw type complaints that they were calling in.
Mostly
Merci,
from
Monsieur
downtown
Nagvi.
core?
Thank you, Mr. Nakvi. Your time is more than up. Thank you. The next speaker is actually myself. Will Mr. Green or Senator Boniface take the chair?
Alors, je vous laisse la
5
parole.
minutes, sir. The floor is yours.
Alors, merci.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen, witnesses, for being here this evening. I have a question for Mr. Watson to start. Mr. Watson, I heard your testimony. I'd like you to tell us about your vision of your role during these events. From what I gather, there were many people involved. There was chiefs of police, Mr. Ayotte, the emergency services, the operations center, the RCMP, the OPP, etc. As the mayor of Ottawa, how would you define your role in the context of these events? Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your question. Certainly, it is the responsibility of a mayor to work with both other orders of government at the federal and provincial level. Mr. Trudeau, Mr. Ford, the ministers, of course, a lot of cooperation with local members like Mr. Nakvi and Madame Fortier, because both of those areas, Mr. Nakvi's and Minister Fortier's, were affected by the protests. Second, provide support to the police department. But it's not possible for a politician, as you know, to give direction as to police operations. It's unlawful and illegal versus the. So I discussed the issue with the other mayors respecting these tow trucks, etc. I publicly thank Mr. Tory, who provided a number of resources to help with the crisis in our city. Thank you, Mr. Watson. You say you spoke to these people to help with the tow trucks. What exactly did you do regarding these tow trucks? You helped. From what I gathered, there were none that were available. They didn't want to get involved. What did you actually have to do to get involved in this? I'll give you a specific example. I was having discussions with Mr. Tory. Mr. Tory provided 3 or 4 phone numbers of tow truck companies. How do you say that in French? Remorqueuse? Okay, thank you. But the priority for me, in my discussions with other orders of government, was to ask for more police officers. We needed 1,800 police officers to support the police service because we were unable to control the situation with the members, the police force members that we had. First off, the discussions, lobbying to try to get more human resources, and second, having discussions with other mayors asking for some information to get. If you'll allow me, Mr. Watson, I don't want to interrupt you. I just have some limited time, but I just would like to continue on this issue of tow trucks. You say you had a few phone numbers. Can you tell us how many? And what companies are you talking to at that point? No, I personally was not making phone calls, but members of our staff, Mr. Kanalakis, for instance. But the problem, Mr. Chair, is that these tow truck companies, how do you say that in French? Yes. The local tow truck companies were saying, no, we're not getting involved in these protests because they were concerned for their own safety, the safety of their own trucks, and that was the problem. How many did you call? I mean, you said, Mr. Watson, you had received phone numbers, 3 or 4 from Mr. Tory. And you provided those phone numbers to a member of your staff to make these phone calls? Who? I think I sent that to Mr. Kanalakis. It's not the mayor's responsibility to make these kinds of calls, as you know, but certainly that was the most serious aspect of the situation. We needed a way to remove the trucks off of Wellington Street. Sorry, I keep interrupting. I'm sorry. You're going to think we're not polite here by interrupting you all the time, but okay, so you provide those numbers to Mr. Kanalakis. What happens? He comes back to you. What happens? The introduction of the Emergencies Act was successful because then we were able to get these trucks. But so those 3 or 4 numbers that you provide to Mr. Kanalakis, when did that happen? A day or 2 before the introduction of the Act. Okay, I understand you didn't hear back about that until the Act was proclaimed. No, we were unsuccessful at getting local companies to be able to provide these tow trucks. And that's one of the reasons why I support the introduction of the Act. It's important.
I do apologize. I'll note that when we intervene, it's to take our time back because we are limited. It's not a personal affront to anything that you're saying in your testimony. Mr. Chair, the chair is now yours.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Mr. Watson, you have the floor, Mr. Green.
And carrying on with that comment, I'm going to put some questions in a rather rapid-fire way. I'm going to ask, through you, Mr. Chair, that the witnesses try to answer the questions in a like manner so that we can get to the list of questions that I have. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mayor Watson. Mayor Watson, how often did you communicate with other levels of government in relation to the protests in downtown Ottawa?
Well, almost on a daily basis with someone from one of the orders of government. It wasn't always necessary.
Did you have any political conversations where you had mentioned, for instance, Mr. Nakvi as a MP representing your riding? Did you have a chance to speak with Mr. Nakvi or other political representatives?
Yes, and he was also the parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Emergency Management, so it was helpful to have that liaison into the minister's
And when
office.
would have been the first time that you had those conversations?
Oh, it would have been the first weekend, probably the Friday when the trucks really started to arrive.
Was there any briefings prior to the arrival of certain security threats that might have been presented?
Well, I know I had a briefing by Chief Slowly and our other emergency operations people earlier in the week.
And did you share that information politically with some of your counterparts?
Sorry, which
did you share the
information?
Chief
Wasn't political. It was,
No, I'm sorry. Did you share the nature of the threat? For instance, if I was getting a briefing as a mayor to say that, I'd received a correspondence from the Hotel Association that 11,000 people are coming for 30 days,
right.
would you have shared that with any other levels of government?
With that particular case, we shared it with the Chief of Police. We got the information from Mr. Steve Ball, who is the president of the Hotel Association. He emailed the city.
And other information like that? Were you able to provide briefings? The question I'm asking, were you able to provide briefings to your political colleagues in upper levels of government?
Well, again, in that particular case, because it was an operational matter, it would not be appropriate to have a political discussion. This was intelligence that came through the Hotel Association. It was forwarded to the appropriate authorities within the police. The police at that time were under the impression that they would come, they might stay a day or two, and then move on.
But the Hotel Association suggested, sir, that in an email to you, 11,000 rooms for 30-plus days, and you stated in your testimony before the Public Order Emergency Commission that you didn't take it seriously.
Well, we didn't take it seriously because there was no follow-up on the part. It's fine for someone to go in and call and say, I'd like to order 11,000 rooms, when in fact we don't have 11,000 rooms in the downtown.
But through you, sir, when they arrived on volume.
Well, that's why I referred it to the police, number one. But
so at that point, when they arrived on volume, and the Hotel Association suggested that they'd be booking for 30 days, at that point, did you believe that they were here to stay?
Well, again, the Hotel Association did not take it seriously. They didn't have the rooms available, number one. Secondly, no down payment or any kind of opportunity was given to collect a down payment.
Sure, in advance. But once they showed up, you would agree that when thousands of people showed up in the city, at that point, perhaps you could have given some veracity to the claim that they had intended from the outset to stay for 30 days. Would you not?
Well, again, I was on the ground. There was no evidence that they were going to stay that long from my perspective.
But the Hotel Association told you they were going to stay.
No, the Hotel Association received an inquiry. It didn't say there were books. There were no rooms booked.
So on that nature, when you mentioned in your testimony, sir, that you worked on an agreement, who did you work on that agreement with?
Well, it wasn't me. It was my chief of staff, and it was city staff that I received a call from Dean French, who was Premier Ford's former chief of staff.
Right.
And he offered to act as some kind of a mediator because he had contacts.
Had you ever done that
trucking.
Before as a mayor? Had you ever intervened?
If you'd like me to answer, I'm going to answer.
I had mentioned to you, sir, through the chair, that I would reclaim my time when appropriate. That's how this committee works. That's how we'll proceed.
But
so through you, Chair, to the witness, I'm asking you a question. Did you, in that process, when you were working through negotiations with Dean French, had you ever in any other situations as a mayor intervened in frontline negotiations with protests, or was this your first time?
Well, we had never had a protest of this nature.
So it was your first time?
I never would have involved myself in something.
Okay.
Because
so part of the agreement, I established your answer. Part of the agreement, did it include staging in Coventry? Were you part of that negotiations that would have had the logistics supply chain set up at a city-owned baseball facility?
No, well, that was a decision by the police and city staff. It wouldn't have been made at the political level. As you know, I hope you know, that we're not allowed as politicians to direct police operations. So for me to start directing the police to go and clean up the Coventry site would have been completely inappropriate.
But you're acting as a third-party negotiator with people who came with hostile interests.
I tried to explain, and you cut me off, sir. The bottom line is I did not negotiate. I had a call from Mr. French, who had contacts within the trucking industry. He got in touch with my chief of staff. They worked out an agreement that was signed by one of the protesters that they would do certain things, and we would then meet with them. They obviously did not live up to the agreement. The Emergencies Act was imposed, which I support, and that brought resolution relatively quickly.
OK, votre temps est écoulé, Mr. Green.
Mr. Green, Mr. Watson, I apologize. Your time is up. It's been over 30 seconds, almost 30 seconds. I allowed you to complete that answer, but I can't let you go on. Senator Boniface, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. short time and lots of questions. Mayor Watson, I'm curious about the provincial role because you've been very specific in your comments, and you had meetings with the federal government, not with the provincial government. The last I looked, the provincial government's responsible for policing in the province and as an oversight for municipalities. So can you tell me what conversations you had with the provincial government on this, and if you could tell us about the tripartite discussions that took place?
Thank you, Senator. I believe it was Minister Blair who suggested that we have a tripartite, in essence, political table with the City of Ottawa, the federal government, the provincial government. And the federal government, of course, supported that. It was their idea. I supported it, but we could not get agreement by the province. I raised the issue myself with Premier Ford, and he did not want to be involved in the tripartite committee. I can say that once we sent our letter asking for 1,800 resources from both the province, the federal government, and municipal police services, there was great cooperation in getting that Wellington Street cleaned up after 3 weeks. But disappointed that we did not have the province at that table because we thought that was a good way to share information and better coordinate our efforts to help take back our street.
Okay, and can you help me understand Mr. French's role? Why would he have reached out to you, and what expertise does he have, or what what did he think he had in terms to offer?
I met him when he was the Premier's chief of staff on a few occasions, and he called really out of the blue. I had not had any contact with him since he left Queen's Park. He said he has contacts in the trucking industry. He does not want to get paid. He's not here to, make money off of this. He saw what was happening, as Canadians saw from coast to coast what was happening, and he offered to act as a go-between. So I said, great, I'll get my chief of staff to call you. They had, I think, a number of calls. The police were informed that this approach had been made to my office. And at the end of the day, to the credit of Mr. French, he was able to reach an agreement that we felt was reasonable, that would require the removal of all the trucks from residential districts, agree not to backfill the residentials, and agree not to displace the truck convoy with other vehicles. And so at the end of that process, just prior to the Emergencies Act on February 14th, we counted approximately 102 vehicles that were moved away from the residential area, which was my number one preoccupation, trying to give some peace of mind to those residents. About, I think, a third or a half of those were big rigs, and the others were pickup trucks and other campers and so on.
Okay, and to Mr. Kanellakis, if I can just get clarity, I'm trying to understand the provincial role, as you would expect here. And so from your emergency management, you and Mr. Ayot's overall responsibility, what's your link to the province? And did you ask for any resources in that regard to fulfill your obligations from an emergency management perspective?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, unlike other emergencies, as the Senator well knows, we didn't link into the Emergency Operations Center of the province. It was very much between the police chief and the police commissioner, Mr. Karik, that was doing the discussions until the request was made by the Police Services Board to ask the mayor to write the joint letter.
Okay, and with respect to your own emergency order, if you can tell me what the purpose of your own declaration of emergency was?
Sure, I don't mind taking that question. So generally, the declaration of emergency will provide us with additional powers, purchasing powers, et cetera. Now in Ottawa, we've been through many emergencies in the past few years, and as a result of that, we've changed our bylaws to allow us to have those powers even without declaring a state of emergency. So primarily, we would use a state of emergency to motion to the public that this is a very, very serious matter and that we're engaging other levels of government as well. So it's a symbolic gesture, and we would make that recommendation to the mayor, and the mayor is the person having the authority to declare that.
Okay, and with respect to the provincial emergency order, what benefit did it give to you as the City of Ottawa?
once again, it provided us with little benefit except for that ideology that this is a serious event and that the province has taken it just as seriously as we are with regards to the declaration from a symbolic gesture. It also may have provided some additional abilities for the police, but I don't have that specific information before me.
Merci, Madame la sénatrice. Votre temps est écoulé.
Thank you, Senator. Your time is up. Senator Carignan, you have 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to continue on the same vein as that issue of the facilitator, Mr. French, who was hired from what the media reported and what you're saying, Mr. Watson, before the commission, was that there used to be city councillors who wanted a facilitator, a mediator, who had actually prepared a resolution project that had been planned to be tabled before City Hall, and there was a discussion with Mr. Blair and Mr. Mendocino, and they rejected the idea of a facilitator, a mediator. Can you elaborate on that? Yes, thank you, Senator. Certainly, that was the suggestion from two members of our municipal council, Councillor Coutier and Eglai, who wrote a resolution to ask for the federal government to draw in the services of a mediator. From what I gather, and I'm not sure why, they don't present that resolution before municipal council. There was a draft of it, but I mentioned the idea probably during that first week of the protests. I suggested it to Mr. Blair and other federal representatives, and they said it wasn't a priority. They said, no, we're not going to go through mediation with the people responsible for the protests. I thought that was a good idea, but at the end of the day, that's the federal government's prerogative to say yes or no, and they said no. But you didn't challenge them to say, why not try? It seems a bit weird to say no, flat out. During the meetings, we had 20 or 25 items on the agenda. There wasn't much time to initiate debate on these things. He said it wasn't a good idea, and okay. He thought it wasn't a good idea. He said, no, we don't need a mediator. We reject that. Sorry, I forgot all the details of that specific debate or discussion with the federal government. But as far as I'm concerned, Senator, the priority is to convince both orders of government that it's necessary for the RCMP and the OPP to provide more officers. Yes, I understand, says the Senator, but it seems as though a mediator worked for part of the city, at least, which was the involvement of Mr. French, right? Yes, but that was a small step. Mr. French's involvement, but we know that about 102 trucks left that area of the city. That was a success. You were happy about that, right? I was, because that was the first time we could detect there was some kind of action through a mediator. Okay. You said that the order or the proclamation of the emergency measures you issued was symbolic solely? You just did that in a symbolic way? Mr. Ayotte has further information on that, but it's not quite that we give ourselves a power that the provincial or federal government would have. There are many people who think it's the same thing as what mayors do in the U.S. In the U.S., the mayors had a lot of power to do these types of things. I'll give you an example. Perhaps in English, because it's a little easier for me. Go ahead. It's a bit complicated.
It allows us to override the procurement process, for instance. When we had COVID-19, and it was at the start, at the recommendation of City Manager Kanalakis, I signed a declaration of emergency declaration because we needed personal protective equipment, masks, needles. We had to shift people from
but you need two trucks now.
Pardon?
Vous aviez besoin de
Yeah, but you need tow trucks here. Yes, certainly. The emergencies. There was no way the city of Ottawa had the power to force a company to provide that service.
Tenders to get, smocks and masks and so on. We could take people from one collective unit that was, there's no recreation programs during COVID, so we could get them and put them in the test centers for COVID-19, working with Ottawa Public Health, par exemple.
Okay.
Merci, Monsieur le Sénateur.
Thank you, Senator. Your time is up.
Sénateur Harder pour 5.
Senator Harder, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for being here, all of you. My questions are going to be for the mayor, at least at the start, and he may want to direct in the answers. Mayor, your earlier description of how the residents of Ottawa felt at that time resonated with me as a resident of Ottawa. And I want to talk a little bit about what the perspective was being here. You said that the OPS lost the street, lost Wellington. I think for a lot of residents in Ottawa, they felt the police, that the police action was in fact a complete breakdown of policing in the municipality. I wonder if you would share that view that we had a breakdown of policing.
Thank you, Senator. I think we're seeing that each and every day during the public inquiry, that clearly we were overwhelmed at the local level in the Ottawa Police. There appeared to be a great deal of argument back and forth amongst the three orders of policing. And there was a lack of a clear direction and communication as to where we were going to get out of this mess that we found ourselves in.
Yeah, and from my perspective, it was not only that there were silos at the jurisdictional level, but there was at least a lack of alignment at the municipal level between the political and administrative arm of the city and the police force itself, and a lack of confidence in the policing leadership. Is that true?
Well, I think at the start, you couldn't say that because, you have to assume it's going to take some time to put together a plan of this nature. It's going to require some logistical challenges to bring people from coast to coast, municipal police forces and so on, and put them up. There was no question, I think, by the beginning of the second weekend, a lot of us, myself included, were wondering, why is this taking so long? This should have been done when the numbers dropped in the middle of the week, and then they came back up on weekends. And that happened, obviously, 3 weekends in a row. So I think there was a general lack of communication and frustration. And in fairness, I'm not prepared to paint every police officer with the same brush, but the women and men who were on the front lines in miserable conditions, being spat upon and yelled at and so on, they were doing the best that they could, and I'm proud of their efforts. Clearly, there was arguments at the higher level of policing where there was allegations of lack of confidence in planning and so on.
How soon did you lose confidence in the leadership of the OPS?
Well, I think it probably started to erode, by the second weekend. When they arrived here, and I know there's a lot of Monday morning quarterbacks that I've heard from and as constituents. But at the end of the day, nothing like this had happened in Ottawa before. So for people to say, well, you should have known this, and they booked hotel rooms and so on, it's easy to criticize. The fact is that, we did not have the resources to go and clean it up. And to the credit of Chief Slowly, and I know he's taken a lot of criticism, but he did lay out in a letter to me that I co-signed with the chair of the police board to the two orders of government. We needed 1,800 officers. We could not move in sooner. We couldn't, for instance, enforce an injunction, police told me, because we just didn't have the resources to do it.
But the police board itself was going through a crisis of confidence.
Yes.
It just seemed, as a resident of Ottawa, that it was a police failure, a governance failure, and a coordination failure all in one.
It was a perfect storm. That's true. And then at the end of the day, our council, through a 2/3 vote, decided to remove the chair of the Police Services Board because of a lack of confidence. The province then moved to remove their 3 appointees, and then we had a whole new police board. And one of the reasons why there was this level of frustration on the part of members of council was that the chair was going to hire a new chief. So we'd have 3 chiefs in 3 days. We had Chief Slowly.
Sounds like the UK government.
Just about. Chief Bell, Interim Chief Bell, and this individual from Waterloo.
Yeah, just on that point, did you at any point in that period seek emergency act declaration at the provincial level or at the federal level?
No, because, again, I had 2 major preoccupations. One was to get the officers, and secondly, to get as many vehicles out of the residential community as possible, because these people were suffering. You know, I went down there on 2 occasions, escorted by the police, to see what was going on. There was a pig roast on a spit. There was fires in pits. There was yelling, screaming. They had these loud train horns that they kept honking. And
Merci, Monsieur Sénateur Harder. Votre temps est écoulé.
Thank you, Senator Harder. Your time is up. Senator Partison, you have the mic for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have one question I'd like to ask Your Worship. Mr. Ayotte has told us that the city did not install barricades on the advice of the Ottawa City Police. And I would have thought that, knowing the convoy was rolling across the country, the barricades might have been a preventive measure to at least protect the parliamentary precinct. So I'm wondering, and maybe it's Mr. Ayotte I should be asking, but did the city ask the police, or what was the interface between the city and the police that led Mr. Ayotte to say the city got advice not to install barricades? Could you elaborate?
I think as you, if you'd allow, Mr. Ayotte would have more detailed information than I would.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very early on, when we established the Emergency Operations Center, we also established a group which is well known in the city called the Traffic Incident Management Group. And it has representatives from our traffic, from our public works, and from the police and our Emergency Operations Center. That group works together to come up with a traffic plan, depending on the jurisdiction of the event. If it's a police-led jurisdiction, such as this was, then the police take the lead on whether or not they approve the closure of roads at the request or through the discussions at the TIMG, which is the Traffic Incident Management Group. So in this particular case, they did get together, they established the group, they had those discussions, and police did not want to close the roads because of, you know, they wanted the flow of traffic to be allowed throughout the city.
In hindsight, do you think that, it's always easier to be wise in hindsight, but do you think that that was the right decision, that the right advice the city police gave you? Could you have prevented a lot of congestion especially in the parliamentary precinct, if barricades had been employed?
Well, we certainly learned from following demonstrations such as Rolling Thunder and on Canada Day that once we closed the roads, we had more control. So in hindsight, yes, that was a mistake, or that was a decision that should have been made at the time, as we've shown through follow-up demonstrations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So, vous avez terminé, Monsieur Patterson?
Yes.
You're done, Mr. Patterson. You still have a minute, 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes. Okay, let's go for the second round. 4-minute questions, sessions. Mr. Brock, you have the floor.
Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you for your attendance today. I mean no disrespect to 3 of you, but I will be focusing exclusively on Lord Mayor Watson.
Lord Mayor, that's only Niagara on the Lake.
Whatever. Okay. In any event, Mayor Watson, in preparation of your testimony today, I reviewed hundreds of pages of transcripts of your recent appearance at the commission, and some of the takeaways were that a number of council referenced documents to you, whether that be emails, whether that be letters, whether that be notes. And I got the impression, listening to your response, or reading your responses, I should say, is that not every meeting you had with government officials resulted in a note. Would that be fair to say?
That's true, yes.
Okay. And where do you place the priority as to when you feel it necessary to record conversations, for instance, with the Prime Minister, with Minister Mendicino, with Minister Blair? Under what circumstances is it appropriate for you to have an accurate recollection by reviewing a note as to what was said, what was discussed during a meeting, and other times when you simply would not prepare a note?
Well, as you know, the apparatus within the Prime Minister's office is quite extensive to provide, I don't know what the proper term is, but a general summary of activities and phone calls and so on. We don't have that practice, and we don't have that ability at the City of Ottawa. In many instances, the calls are coming fast and furious on cell phones. For instance, when when the Premier first reached me, he called my cell phone from his cell phone. On another occasion, I think I called his cell phone to ask for support. Okay. So it was, it was not a common practice to have that kind of note taking at the municipal level.
Were any of the conversations recorded?
Not by us, no.
You made reference to many occasions where you'd have to take a look at your records to see whether or not a response was made, perhaps to a letter to the Prime Minister or a letter to a minister. If I ask you this question, would you comply and provide details of any and all notes, correspondence, briefing materials that you have not already supplied to the Commission Council?
Yeah, according to our lawyers, everything that was asked for has been delivered to the public inquiry.
Okay, I'm not asking what was asked for. I'm saying if there is any other material relating to your involvement with the Prime Minister and any minister at a federal level, if there is anything outstanding that was not requested by Commission Council, will you provide that to this committee?
Yeah, to the best of my knowledge, Mr. Brock, there is no other information. We scoured emails and correspondence, written and electronic, and it was all provided to the inquiry. I'm not aware of anything that was held back. We'd have no reason to hold back any information.
I want to circle back to Senator Carrignon's questions to you about the utility of having the federal government engage in mediation. And I have a very limited amount of time. Would you agree with me that there is a precedent that has been set by the federal government, by numerous prior prime ministers, including our current prime minister, that there is precedent that from time to time, with protests on the Hill and off the Hill, that the prime minister or members of his cabinet have spoken to those protesters? Would you agree with that?
Une réponse rapide, M. Watson.
A quick answer, if you can.
Not well versed on prime ministers going to speak to protesters, so I wouldn't have any historical information to offer an informed opinion.
Merci, M. Brock. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Brock. Mr. Watson. Madam Ben-Dayan, you have 4 minutes. Thank you.
Mr. Brock's question regarding mediation, I myself am an accredited mediator. I certainly believe in the power of mediation, but mediation requires the right parties around the table, and I understand your earlier testimony that there was no representative or even representatives that were in control of the blockaders within Ottawa. I believe it was Mr. Kanalakos that stated that earlier. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Is that your understanding, Mayor?
Yeah, there's no question that there were many leaders, and they didn't all sing from the same hymn book, if you will, and as a result, we were approached by Ottawa Police Services to see if we could get involved, first through Mr. Kanalakis.
But there was no single person or persons to negotiate with?
No, there was no one leader. It was very disjointed.
You also testified earlier that Minister Blair attempted to set up a tripartite working group or these tripartite meetings, federal, provincial, and municipal governments all together, communicating, exchanging information, and finding solutions. You testified at the commission your disappointment that the province, your words, and the province rejected that. You went on to say they didn't feel it was necessary to have the three orders of government at the political level at this table. I can only imagine, being the mayor of the second largest city of Ontario, your surprise and disappointment that your province was not interested.
Well, I think that's a fair assessment. The Premier did not come to Ottawa during the entire occupation, which was unfortunate. He called the tripartite proposal by the federal government a waste of time. And I felt it was a lost opportunity. He thought it was going to be a bit of a gab fest, and why would you have all these people sitting around the table? And I said, well, because we need to get on the same page to get this thing.
Particularly since I understand that you had a conversation with the Solicitor General of Ontario, and she was under the impression that there was 1,500 OPP officers on the ground, and you've indicated that that was not true at all. In fact, you had to explain to the provincial government that there was more like 50. That's quite different from 1,500. How is it possible that there was such a lack of understanding and communication between municipal and provincial governments in this case?
Well, my understanding is that within the last week or so at the inquiry, I believe there was a clarification that the information that the minister was getting was incorrect. I think what was happening was they were doing an accumulation of days. So if 50 came one day and then 40 left, another 50, they'd keep adding it up. I don't know how they got to 1,500, because we would know if there are 1,500 OPP officers in downtown, you would see them in their distinctive uniforms. And just as a final point, I think the other challenge is that I went back to the police after I heard that from the minister, and they said, no, there's 50 to 55 OPP any day, any given day.
Sir, I have one final question in the time that remains. You testified in earlier questioning here that your confidence eroded at the second weekend. As we know, this blockade lasted far longer than that. How did you foresee this ending? What needed to happen, or did you believe that an intervention was necessary in order for this to end in your city?
Absolutely. I think, what was happening was that the protesters and the occupiers were emboldened. They had a national, international stage, the Parliament buildings in the backdrop, music blaring out, speeches by everyone.
But how would this end in your mind?
Well, it was going to end by police intervening and cleaning up the site, and we needed the officers and we needed the tow trucks. When those both came available, we saw action, and it was taken care of in 3 days.
And how did those become available?
As a result of the Emergency Act that allowed us to get tow trucks. We had to end up putting decals, Ottawa Police Service decals on the trucks, because the tow trucks were still fearful of retaliation by...
Were it not for the emergency...
Votre temps est écoulé, Madame Bendayan.
Your time is up, Madame Bendayan. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Watson. It's actually my turn. Mr. Green, are you prepared to take the chair?
Mr. Green.
Thank you. Mr. Watson, I'm sorry to get back to you, but you were the mayor of Ottawa. If we could go back in time, if the situation were to recur, in your view, would there be a way of avoiding these people sort of setting up shop here in downtown Ottawa? It's good for me to practice my French, so thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
We should have shut down Wellington Street much sooner. Everyone could figure that out when the trucks were coming. It was, they shouldn't be that close to the parliamentary precinct. And as I said, I think the prize for the protesters was to have the backdrop of Parliament Hill. If we shut Wellington and they go down to Slater or Albert, there's nothing spectacular about the scenery in Slater and Albert, and they probably wouldn't stay that long. Alors, pour moi,
so as far as I was concerned, it's a mistake that Wellington Street was not blocked off ahead of time, and that's a lesson learned. Okay, we understand that Wellington was occupied, but if you look at the first day of the occupation when the people arrived, we see that it took a few days. There were just an increasing number of people settling in. We were talking about, barbecues and hot tubs, etc. If the situation had been addressed from the start, after a day or two, and when we saw trucks parking on Wellington Street, if this were to happen again, what would you do to clear up the downtown core of Ottawa?
Bien, certainement, fermer la rue Wellington en avant.
Certainly close off Wellington from the start, and if there are trucks on Wellington that are illegally parked, to use these tow trucks to remove those trucks. Because at the end of the day, there is no spot to park on Wellington Street. It's dangerous to have cars or vehicles parked there right across from Parliament. So to be more proactive, closing off access to that street, it's a very important street. I think it might be the most important street in the country. Why did you not do that, Mr. Watson? Why not order the trucks being towed right from day 1 or 2? Well, that's probably the most important question to ask. Certainly for our country, for our city, why? And that's the reason why I testified that, in my view, it's a mistake that the city and the police did not close off access to Wellington Street ahead of time. But when you're dealing with 20 or 50 trucks over the span of 1 hour, it is very difficult to then react. Thank you, Mr. Watson. My time is up.
Witness to finish his answer so that he.
Thank you so much, Mr. Green.
Thank you.
Mr. Green.
Mr. Green, you have the floor for 3 minutes.
Very much. It's my position that over the course of the commission, there's been quite a bit of historical revisionism in some of the testimony that's been provided, some contradictory testimony that's been provided at certain committees here by our law enforcement agencies that have been involved, and the changing nature of the threat. This committee's mandate is to determine whether or not the threshold of a national security was in order, and at this point, I'm still unclear about that. But what I am clear about, regardless of the legal nature of the invocation of the act, that there was a practical collapse of policing within the city of Ottawa. That the Ottawa Police Service was wholly incapable and inadequate to meet the size and scale of the operation that was presented here. Councillor Fleury, given that you have had, primary contact with your residents about the impact and the nature, being a representative of the wards most impacted by it, I want to give you the opportunity to explain if your experience of the protests and the information that you received from residents was consistent with the OPS's communications about the convoy, and in particular with reference to some of these reports that were perhaps framed by Rex Murphy and some other ludicrous things, that if you could comment about whether, in your experience, it was just some good old boys rolling into town to have a talk with the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Member. I hear a number of questions in what you're bringing up, and I think police jurisdiction is certainly an issue of discussion for us locally. The local taxpayers who pay for the local policing of their city, who were then extremely preoccupied by what we call locally the red zone. So Ottawa Police got extremely focused on what was this red zone, and on the periphery of the red zone was us locals trying to...
Specificity and appreciating the political nature of the question, is it your opinion that your characterization and your experience of the occupation is consistent with the recent testimony of the OPS given the nature of the threat?
I have not listened to every member. I continue my role as a councillor, and these are hours and hours long testimonies, so I wouldn't be in a position to comment.
Is it your opinion that, given what you experienced, that there was a legitimate threat, and even if certain legal aspects were available, that the practical collapsing of a functional police service under the occupation made it impossible for them to do their job?
I think there was certainly obvious errors that happened at the leadership level of the OPS, including allowing trucks to use non-truck routes, including not explaining to the public, to businesses in the area, what the plan was.
Do you think there was a plan?
Votre temps est écoulé, Monsieur Green.
Your time is up. Senator Carignan, you have 3 minutes. Quickly, Mayor, I myself was a mayor. I was president of the Public Safety Commission from the Municipalité du Québec. I'm shocked to hear that you're saying that it's symbolic to have this order for emergency measures. I was looking at the legislation in Ontario. I hear here that the council determines and assesses the various risks for public safety that could lead to emergencies and determines other infrastructure elements under its jurisdiction that could be affected by that emergency measure. You are mayor of Ottawa. There are public buildings there. There's parliament there. The protests, something quite common in the city. Do you have an emergency measures plan that provides for the type of issues that happen with these protests?
On avait un plan.
Yes. We had a plan, sir. Mr. Ayad explained the Emergency Operations Center and all the stages within that. But the Act is really clear. To declare an emergency for a municipality, there aren't that many powers for a municipality. In your plan, did you assess these sort of excessive protests happening before Parliament? Did you have the risk to identify that? Did you have means you were going to take? Perhaps Mr. Ayad should answer that question. I mean, you must adopt things. I mean, I used to adopt things. Do you have a plan? Yes, we had plans. There have been many protests in the city of Ottawa, as you know. Environmental disasters like these tornadoes and floods. Would it be possible to have the emergency measures plan for the city of Ottawa that refers to these protests and the measures you need to take when there are protests and overflow?
We provide our plan. However, the plan for demonstrations falls completely under police jurisdiction, and they're responsible for the response. So it will be a combination of our emergency response plan is an all hazards plan, which means that it includes demonstrations, and the police have the responsibility of developing the plans for responding to demonstrations. And we don't have necessarily access to that because it's operational plans, and it might include public order and other type measures. And obviously, the public is not privy to that in that there could be counter plans to our plan. So we have an emergency plan. There's a demonstration component to the emergency plan, which falls under the jurisdiction of the police, and the police are responsible for that.
Okay,
Okay, but it's not solely the responsibility of the police because there are employees of public works or road infrastructure. You have to determine the role of each and every person, right?
The plan deals with all departments within the city would respond to support the police, but just like a fire, if we had a major fire, the police wouldn't be telling the fire chief how to put that fire out.
I agree.
So the people with the subject matter expertise and the responsibilities are those who are responsible for developing those specific operational plans. But within
Merci,
our emergency
Monsieur Ayat.
plans,
Thank you, Mr. Ayat. I'm sorry. Senator Harder, you have 3 minutes.
Okay.
We earlier talked about the collapse of the police capacity and the police to respond to the occupation, and the lack of coordination amongst the various police forces involved, and in a sense the lack of political coherence across the levels of government. You welcomed the imposition of the declaration of emergency by the Government of Canada. And it was shortly after that emergency declaration that, in fact, you saw in Ottawa the model of policing in terms of dealing with and dismantling the occupation. Was that just a coincidence?
No, I think the Emergencies Act acted as a catalyst for us to have the ability to move in, have the first day of the counter activity to clean up Wellington Street. I saw outside City Hall 14 or 15 tow trucks all lined up on Laurier Avenue, ready to go. I thought the police, when the plan was implemented, did an excellent job. People were literally glued to their television as they saw the police moving and dismantling Coventry, Wellington, Rideau and Sussex, Byward Market. And I commend all of the officers for the work that they did, but they could not have done that because if we got the people out, we'd still have the trucks there. And we had to get rid of the trucks because they were acting almost as a shield or a weapon to those people that wanted to peacefully walk in front of the Parliament buildings.
Thanks very much. My final question, Mayor, is you commented earlier on the disappointment you felt, and certainly as a resident of Ottawa, many of my fellow residents felt, that the absence of the Premier's involvement personally here. Can you confirm with us that he did visit Ottawa during the floods and the hurricanes that you referenced in your early remarks?
He was at the tornado that affected Dunrobin primarily and the west end of the city, but he was not here during the occupation, and he was here for a brief moment during the big storm, at the end of the big storm, which he was in the middle of an election, and he stopped at a fire station, but I don't think he saw any of the damage.
Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you, Senator Harder. We've now completed our first 2 rounds of questioning, and we're going to take the third round on now with the same length of time, 5 minutes each. Mr. Motz, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. I want to go back to you, Mr. Watson. You've left the impression here today that it wasn't until the Emergencies Act was invoked that you actually were able to clear out the protest, which we all know isn't true. You had tow trucks. We know Superintendent Bernier testified at commission 2 days ago that there were 34 tow trucks they already lined up long before the Emergencies Act was invoked. So would it be reasonable to suggest then that had actual enforcement action taken place dealing with existing laws that we have on municipal bylaws, provincial statutes, and federal law, and negotiation, humble, respectful negotiation, that it is possible that with the police operational plan that was in place that could have worked, and the Emergencies Act would never have and may never have ever been necessary?
Well, as you know, Mr. Motz, later in the day, it was confirmed that those 35 tow trucks never made it to Ottawa. The deal fell apart, and the OPP, I believe, confirmed that yesterday, later in the day. That was the big news that I read about today. So, in fact, we didn't have tow trucks prior to the Emergencies Act. There was a...
So let's go back for a minute. So whether we had tow trucks or you didn't have tow trucks, there is lots of talk about whether or not enforcement action took place, didn't take place, could have taken place, and enforcement negotiation, police plans that were in place before the Emergencies Act came into being could have resolved this. And I go back to a statement you made earlier that a mediator was actually offered, that the suggestion was made, and I'm shocked that a federal minister of the Crown didn't think it was a good idea, didn't want them to get involved. I was shocked that that was the position of this government. To me, they've completely disregarded the concerns of Canadians with that particular attitude. And we wonder why there's division in this country. It appears to me that the federal government was more interested in optics of looking tough than actually resolving the situation. That concerns me. It concerns all Canadians. I like all members of this House, we walked around downtown. We know what happened here, and I get asked all the time in my constituency whether or not actually what was reported, did it actually happen? And I says, not the way it was reported. Did it impact people? Absolutely it did. But the issue is people wanted to be heard.
Point of order, Chair.
Oui, Monsieur Brock.
If we could suspend his time.
Oui, c'est suspendu.
I'm asking for the chair to point out to members of the Liberal team that it's wholly inappropriate to be talking above a member who is asking questions of a particular witness. I'm asking for respect. We provide respect when they ask questions. This isn't question period. This isn't an opportunity to heckle. I'm just asking for a little bit of decorum. Thank you.
Merci, M.
Thank you, Mr. Brock. If anyone wants to respond, otherwise, Mr. Motz. Mr. Motz, you still have the floor.
Very much, Chair. You know, there are numerous sides to this situation. It was something that could have been resolved a lot sooner. We all know that, and we all believe that. Had appropriate action been taken by many people around this table who believe law enforcement could have done something different earlier on, that the government certainly could have been respectful to the people that came here, the Canadians that came here to be heard, and they weren't. And you know, as an elected member of a government who represent, you know, a part of this country that you know, believes in democracy, it's actually quite shameful. And the smear that's gone on to characterize individuals, you know, that our government did, that our prime minister did, I think is inappropriate and led, you know, and created the hassle that happened here, put the city of Ottawa in a very difficult situation, and basically you guys were left hung out to dry to some degree on trying to resolve this without you know, proper negotiation. And if you actually had a tripartite you know, meetings, why were negotiators not involved? Why wasn't there efforts made to listen to negotiate or to protesters, because they had legitimate concerns?
Do I have time to answer? Well, you raised a dozen different issues there,
Yeah,
so I'm not going to be able to answer. You know, I lived through the protest, the vulgarity of it. I gave examples of boorish behavior. After things had gotten cleaned up, I was walking around the area and was called an effing fag because I'm gay by some of these people who came in to disrupt our community. This was not some simple protest. This was a serious takeover of our downtown.
I want to stop you right there. Mr. Mayor,
Your time is up, Mr. Motz. I'm sorry.
Here
Monsieur
was
Motz.
part of the protest.
Monsieur Motz.
You know that many other people come.
Mr. Motz.
Thank you.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Mme Bendayen.
It's okay, Madam Bendayen. I think Mr. Motz understood. You have the floor, Madam No, actually, Mr. Varani has 5 minutes. Thank you very much. I'll start with Mr. Fleury.
You commented in your very opening that just at the Rideau Centre, some 300 businesses and 1,500 employees were affected. That's correct? But you also represent the Byward Market. I presume the number of businesses and number of employees was actually greater than that if you include businesses that were shut down during this so-called Freedom Convoy for these three weeks plus that it endured. Is that correct?
Correct. Including Rideau Street and the Byward Market, there's around 1,000 local businesses.
And did you find it at all ironic that people that were here ostensibly on the basis of freedom and over their objections towards lockdowns effectively locked down the part of the city that you represent?
Yes.
And when the blockade, the people that came and blockaded or occupied, as people have called it, the cities, some of the evidence that came out at the commission that Justice Rouleau is running was that, in fact, this was a boon to business because there's so many people here. They're actually buying a lot and shopping a lot and eating a lot. How would you respond to that kind of perspective?
Certainly not. The Rideau Centre is an economic driver. Having the Rideau Centre closes a number of things in the area that rely on that business going to the Rideau Centre. So the businesses were at that point in time and where we were with the restrictions were able to open. But there were restrictions. But many had to close because of the impacts of those who came to our city and didn't allow us to as locals, to live normally.
Thank you. And Mayor Watson, I want to direct something to you. So I'm reading from an Ontario Provincial Police Situation Report, which is dated February the 6th. And on page 5 of that report, I'm just going to read it to you and ask you to comment. It says, quote, "The apparent support from Canadian political figures is certain to further embolden those organizing and participating in the blockade, lending them credibility and validating their tactics. Any such validation may also motivate further blockades elsewhere in the country, such as those in Alberta. Support for the blockade from public officials or other influential figures is likely to nurture and embolden ideologically motivated extremists in Canada, As long as the blockade remains in place, it will continue to attract individuals and groups with a range of different ideologies, agendas, and intentions, hoping to capitalize on the protest for their own ends. Could you comment on that in light of your opening statements about people that were providing coffee and Timbits to those who were involved in the blockade?
Yeah, I think it was absolutely reprehensible that members of Parliament, who should be held in high esteem, were out there kibitzing and mugging for photos with 18-wheelers and individuals who were honking their horns, keeping people awake at night, causing such stress in the neighborhood. And to have leading members of one political party, namely the Conservatives, going out there and posting pictures on Twitter, that's just salt to the wound of those people in our community who are putting up with so much nonsense. And as I said earlier in my comments, what happens if I went into your riding and brought a bunch of 18-wheelers and blocked your main street in your Toronto riding and honked horns for 3 weeks in a row? And, we're just acting in such an outrageous fashion. Any good, or they wanted to come out of this was lost by the boorish behavior. They lost the court of public opinion. People are saying, you know what, this is not acceptable in a civil society to have this kind of behavior. And then to have members of Parliament who would give it some credibility by showing up and hugging and mugging with the truckers who were doing such damage to our nation's capital. We should have great pride in our nation's capital. And the way that that went on, I just was disgusted by that outrageous behavior, and no one can, no one should be subjected to that kind of nonsense.
And can I just take you back to the tow truck example, and I'll use the English, not the remorqueur. But specifically, you said that you needed tow trucks to remove the vehicles, and you weren't able to access them. Is that a fair characterization?
That's right. And just to clarify on Mr. Mott's, the 34 magical tow trucks never appeared. So they were not there. If you go to the transcript of the hearings, you'll see that the OPP confirmed that it wasn't able to deliver on those 34
and I
trucks.
just have a few more seconds left, but you indicated that the reprisals and the threats were so strong that even once the Emergencies Act was invoked, that once the tow trucks were procured, you had to cover the company's names to prevent further reprisals. So you used OPP decals or OPS decals over the tops of the trucks' names.
That's right. When you saw all of the trucks lined up, all of their markings and their address and their phone number were covered with Ottawa Police Service stickers because these individuals were fearful of retribution. And we had one example when the protesters put together that wooden shack down by Confederation Park. One of the tow trucks that came in to help move some of that away, they were harassed and people were taking down the phone number, even though that truck driver later said he was there in support of the convoy. And that was an area where our First Nations representatives were
Merci,
outraged
M. Watson. Votre temps
by
est
the
écoulé
behavior.
depuis quelques...
Thank you, Mr. Watson. Your time's been up for a little while, Mr. Varani. I actually have the floor now. Mr. Green, can you take the chair? 5 minutes. Thank you. Mr. Watson, you won't be surprised by my comment because I'll actually be continuing in the same vein. I want to really complete this issue of tow trucks. You said earlier that if you had to do this all over again, you'd have these trucks towed by day 1 or 2 from the very start of the protest. I have to say that makes sense as far as I'm concerned. I think that's a logical answer and would have been ideally the case. I'm wondering why this didn't happen. 5 minutes, Mr. Green. Why didn't that happen from the start?
Because I think all of us, the police and city officials and government officials, were caught off guard. That the only indication we had was that there were trucks coming. We've had large truck vehicles, mostly farm equipment vehicles that have come to Parliament Hill in the past. They protested, they had their say, and then they moved back home to their communities. So,
Ouais, là, mais là, on nous dit...
Okay, but here, I understand what you're saying. I know I was there. The farmers came in with, farm equipment, but that lasted a day or so. They would, travel on Wellington Street and they would leave. I don't think you can really compare these things. It's not the same thing, really. We can't compare these two things. But here we're talking about major tow trucks that are telling us, okay, or these big trucks that say they're going to settle in to Wellington Street. All of Canada is aware of this. We know these major 18-wheelers and other trucks are going to show up and settle in. Some people say that it's for a few weeks. But perhaps I'm naive. It seems to me it's unacceptable, not in one case and not in the other, to blockade, to block off the center town of Ottawa, even if it had been only one weekend. And I have the impression, correct me if I'm wrong, I think everyone agrees it makes no sense. It disrupted the lives of citizens of Ottawa. It endangered the safety of everyone in the area, parliamentarians, staff, and residents. It makes no sense. I think, let's not belabor that point. It makes no sense. But the question is this. As of the point where we know they're coming, why does no one take any measures to stop them from coming here, or at least at the end of the first day, before the second, let's get them towed. Why didn't that happen then? That's the question I still can't wrap my mind around since the beginning of our hearings.
Well, Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Chair.
Concerns. I'm obviously, as mayor, not able to direct police on operational matters by law. But I think what happened in our situation, we ended up being the guinea pig for the rest of the country. And that's why Quebec City, as well as Toronto, were able to deal with the situation much more efficiently than we were, because they saw what happened. They took preventive steps in Quebec City during the Carnival and resolved the problem relatively quickly. And the same happened in Toronto, where they had the ability to protect Queen's Park and make sure it didn't turn into a second Ottawa. So we were the first ones, really, that were tested. And as a result, unfortunate for us, but as a result, it helped other jurisdictions ensure that they were better prepared than we were.
Je comprends votre...
I understand what you're saying. I would tend to agree with you. But I get back to the same question. Day one, people are settling in. I think they arrived, it was a Friday night or a Saturday morning, they started coming into the city. On that Sunday, it was clear they were there to stay. Why did we not call on the tow trucks to come and tow these trucks? I mean, perhaps provide a 1 or 2 hour warning. Why not immediately proceed to the evacuation?
Well, the first trucks I saw on Wellington Street were some pickup trucks on Thursday, and then more came on Friday, and then it culminated, obviously, the large number on Saturday. You'll have to ask the Ottawa Police Services chief and acting chief why the system failed us, because clearly we knew they were coming.
Je m'excuse, monsieur.
Sorry, Mr. Watson, but why you? You're the mayor. Why didn't you tell your chief of police or your chief of public safety or the director general, hey, wake up now? They've been here for 2-3 days. We need to evacuate them. Did no one think that you needed to raise that alarm?
Sorry?
How much time do we have?
Yeah, can Mr. Kanalakis, who is the liaison with us and the police?
We only have 15 seconds, so there's no point.
J'ai pas compris la réponse.
I didn't understand the answer.
Va donner la réponse parce...
Can he provide the answer?
I only have 15 seconds, so I can't answer the question in 15 seconds, but I would like to answer the question.
J'aurais aimé aussi.
I would have liked that as well. Mr. Green, you have...
Can allow him to answer the question? Okay. Please continue.
Mr. Chair, the answer is that once the decision was made, based on the information Ottawa Police had, to allow the trucks into downtown as a strategy, to basically allow them in for the weekend with the belief that they would leave after the weekend. That was the information we had going into the weekend. Once that happened, and the trucks then got entrenched downtown with the number of people that we had, it was impossible to put tow trucks in that crowd and safely remove a tow truck without securing the area, as we did in the final weekend. Police, if you notice, pushed them back. Tow trucks came in behind police and took out the trucks. There's no way you can safely, and there's a number of police officers on this committee, you can safely bring a tow truck into a crowd of tens of thousands of people and move those heavy trucks without police being able to secure those trucks to get them out. So once we lost downtown and those were parked, it was impossible for us to get it out without having an incredible police operational plan with public order units to be able to secure that area, because they were backed up front to back, very tight. They had to pull them out. There was no way they were going to come out.
Okay. Thank you.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you. Mr. Green, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Much. Mr. Ayad, I understand before your newest role you were the fire chief. Is that correct?
That's correct.
In the conversations around the Public Order Emergency Commission, sorry, not the Emergency Commission, in the integrated task force that you had, the emergency coordinating body, was there any conversations about the jerry cans of diesel that were being brought in? Was that a concern for you?
It was a concern for several people, primarily because you're bringing in lots of gasoline into a certain area, and you want to make sure, or diesel, and you want to make sure that it's being used for the purpose that it's supposed to be used. And when you're thinking of a demonstration, there's always a possibility that those volatile liquids could be used for other things like Molotov cocktails or other type of weapons. So you're never guaranteed that it's just going to be used to refill. So that was the primary concern with the gas.
And just for the record, can you please refresh me on the name of the coordinating group that you put together after the emergency order was called?
Well, within the city, we had the EOC, the Emergency Operations
That's
Center.
the one.
And
So in that, when you were getting updates, I'm sure you would have received some information from police services as well?
yes, they're on our.
Were there any conversations about ideologically motivated violent extremists and the potential for infrastructure within the city of Ottawa to potentially be a target?
Yes, but there was no information that came forward with regards to that. The police did not share. If they had that intelligence, we weren't privy to that intelligence.
I think it's clear through testimony in the commission that they weren't even sharing it amongst each other. So from that perspective, when the incident happened in Coots, when you talked about the progression of the emergency, as the perceived threat elevated, what was your response? So, for instance, we've identified there's now jerry cans going into what is essentially a corridor and alleyway of the Prime Minister's office, complete with a crane and a wrecking ball, and the House of Commons. In your opinion, particularly as it relates to incendiary devices and this threat, when you found out about the threat for ideologically motivated violent extremists in Coots, i.e., the weapons that were found, embedded within the protests, did that change the tenor of your organizing and planning efforts?
So we tend to look at it from a risk perspective versus a threat perspective.
Okay.
So the police will consider it a threat perspective, and we look at it from risk.
How would you describe the risk?
Well, we would look at first of all, we have to have the information to make a decision on risk. So unless we get specific information with regards to specific threats, then we can't identify what the risk is. So we could only surmise and then look at potential risks. And that's where you're looking at potential risks for gasoline or for diesel.
And in your
for
opinion, were there
propane.
potential risks present once the incendiary devices started to be transported into the area?
Yeah, well, they weren't incendiary devices unless they became incendiary devices.
Sure,
they were
but they were flammable.
materials that could be used in
Correct.
incendiary devices.
Correct.
So the risk also the storage of large propane containers
Right.
in a consolidated area was also a risk in a different way, in that they weren't going to be used as incendiary devices. but
At
they
what
could
point
be,
did your emergency
inventory.
operations committee consider Coventry Road? Like, was that something that was brought to you? It was city-owned property. Is that something that you okayed to say, yeah, we're going to allow a logistics supply chain to be set up off-site?
So Coventry was supposed to be as an overflow parking only originally. So when police came to us and said, we don't have space for all of these vehicles that are coming into the downtown Ottawa.
So let's
we're
accommodate
looking for overflow parking.
Right.
So we approved it for that. It morphed into something else
Correct.
as time went on.
Sure. And at that time, when it morphed, what was your response back to the police in terms of what was one of the most sophisticated logistics supply chains I've ever seen on a direct action when it relates to a protest? What was your response to the OPS?
Well, we certainly weren't happy with the use of city property for that purpose. But we're also reminded throughout this incident that, any single point of contact could cause riots. And when we look at, without having that experience in Canada, like we see in the United States,
Right.
our exposure is to what happens in the States. And do we want people killed, and do we want
Was
burning buildings?
January 6th a
And
reference for you when you were doing your planning on the emergency
not
operation?
just January 6th. When you look at all the racial incidents that are happening in the States,
One-
and the far
one more
right
question.
versus far left incidents,
Sure.
those are all
One-
concerns that we didn't want to happen in Ottawa. So
Right.
from an objective of
But to
trying
be clear,
keep the
there was no
citizens safe, I think we
instances
did
of
quite a
far
good job.
left present on this particular action, for the record. So as it relates to aid to civil power, is that something you contemplated?
Yeah, no.
In your past, for other things that have happened, have you ever...
I'm not quite sure what you mean by that.
When the Attorney General of the Province of Ontario requests that the military come in to provide
Yes.
backup support,
Yeah.
is that something, I see you nodding your head, Steve, is that something you're familiar with?
Yes, there was a discussion, and there was actually a motion crafted at council, but it never proceeded.
Why?
And I did raise the issue with the Deputy Minister of Public Safety to say that there were inquiries about using civil aid, and he said it was a non-starter for the federal government.
For the provincial.
Monsieur Green, merci.
Just as a point of clarity, I want to make sure that we're clear.
You're right, sir. It is through the provincial, but the question was posed: would the federal government support it if the request came through?
And so, just for it's a point of clarity. It's a very important distinction. You're saying that it was the federal government that said it wasn't.
I was advised it was a non-starter
from the federal government.
Monsieur Green.
Mr. Green, I'm sorry, your time is up, and by far, sorry. You'll get back to it. There's one more turn after this one, and we're not done yet. Senator Boniface, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. And I want to go back to the day that the protest was brought to an end. Mr. Kanalakis, you've been around the environment for some time in terms of both policing and as a city manager. Have you ever seen anywhere in the country where that type of enforcement has been required?
Mr. Chair, never.
And would it be fair to say in the negotiations and discussions and the information you're able to glean from the 3 weeks, and I'm sympathetic, let me give you the forefront to this, I'm sympathetic to Mr. Motz's point that there were many people there from a variety of views, and what started out perhaps as a single grievance morphs into many grievances, and as you know, you start negotiating with someone and you find out they can't lead. And they switched, there's a different group in charge and such like. So I think we all understand that that's a convoluted situation to try to figure out. But when I look at the police operation that took place that day, and the mayor mentioned it, was exceptional. I would say it's beyond exceptional, it's unprecedented. So I look at G20, G8, where we would have had, and this would have been in your city at some point earlier, but I look at the operation, I think of the skill, but I also think about the risk for the police officers. And we were fortunate that day that they were able to complete that operation the way they did in such a professional way. And would you agree with me, part of the success they had on that particular day was because some people chose to leave when they were given notice?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I would agree with that, yes.
So some people chose to leave, some people chose to stay, and some people decided to face down the enforcement after 3 weeks of what essentially becomes. So I think it gives, would you agree with me, it gives you the range of people who were there.
Yes, sorry, it's being turned on automatically. Apologies. Yes, I would agree with that.
And when you look at it from lessons learned, which I think you and Mr. Ayotte both spoke about, what's the number one lesson that you learned from the incident?
I think that the assumptions that were made leading into the first weekend were within the usual paradigm of the hundreds of protests we have every year in the city of Ottawa, and that the advanced planning that would have been required to effectively deal with some of the other questions we've been asked, effectively deal with that weekend, were not in place. So we got behind, as a city, as a police service, we got behind the event and could not get ahead of it then because the resources were not adequate to be able to meet it. So the biggest lesson in my mind is, and there's been a lot of discussion at the public inquiry, is the intelligence translating into strategy was a big gap.
Intelligence to action. Absolutely. And in that vein, have you, because I look and I think as a Canadian can tell you, a friend of mine from New Zealand sent me an email and asked me what we were exporting from Canada to New Zealand because they ended up being faced with it. And have you had inquiries or such like from other parts of other cities in outside of Canada trying to seek information?
I have not.
And have you had from other cities across the country?
Other than words of encouragement, but nothing beyond that.
So is there a debriefing taking place within the city that will allow other cities to learn from this incident, including the actions of the police?
Yes, we do, as part of our emergency management bylaw, have after-action reports, but that's been put on pause because of the public inquiry, because of the work of this committee, and our Auditor General has also been seized, who's an independent officer of council, is also conducting a parallel audit of the entire process. So we put it on hold till we receive all that, and then we'll do our after-action report.
Okay, am I okay?
10 seconds. 10 seconds.
Well, I'll just make a quick suggestion. Be careful of waiting too long, because the lessons you learn you may need in another time.
Merci, Madame la Sénatrice.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Carignan, you have the floor for 5 minutes. Thank you. My question is for Mayor Watson. Based on your testimony, it seems you had a high confidence level in Chief Slowly. Am I mistaken?
Yes, I backed Chief Slowly. I think it was the role of the mayor in the midst of a crisis to support their chief of police, and I did. And I saw no reason for him to switch out. Obviously, we're receiving more information as to what was happening behind the scenes, but based on my observations, I had confidence in him and the two deputies.
And the Ottawa Police on February 12th published a press release saying that all available officers were deployed last night. We have a plan to end this illegal occupation. We are waiting for the necessary reinforcements to get to that point. So that was published on their internet site, from the Ottawa Police Service internet site, that is. Did you discuss the plan with Mr. Slowly?
Senator, I had almost daily, if not every couple of hours, discussions with either the chief or the deputy chief, either in my office or Zoom calls or on a conference call. But again, the theme of almost every call was we can't move until we have more officers, because our police force still had to police the rest of the city. We couldn't put all our resources downtown. We had suburban and rural communities. So, most of my time during that lead up to when we got the okay for the 1,800 officers was lobbying the provincial and federal governments. Ultimately we were successful. They moved in, and I think as Senator Boniface mentioned, something that we often forget about is there was no death during this protest and occupation, and no serious injuries.
Yeah.
And that's to the credit, I think, of the police officer.
And what was the plan?
Remarkable work and difficult circumstances.
If you can answer my question, what was the plan?
Pardon?
C'était quoi?
What was the plan?
Well, the plan was, as we saw it unfold, where we got tow trucks, we had the officers move in strategically,
Okay, donc c'était le même plan.
So it was the same plan. The Chief Slowly's plan is the one that was implemented.
Basically, it was only three or 4 days difference between the time Chief Slowly resigned and the police action began. So I have to assume, again, I'm not involved in the details of the plan, I have to assume that a good portion of the plan had already been assembled by Chief Slowly under his command. Then when he resigned, Chief Bell took over. My understanding was there was greater cooperation at the provincial and RCMP level at that time, and that the plan was to move to clear out systematically Wellington Street, Lower Town, Rideau and Sussex.
Vous avez dit.
You said that your work was to lobby other police services, other cities. You testified that you called colleagues, fellow mayors, to get their support from their police services, police forces. That worked. You didn't have anyone say no. None of your colleagues said no as far as supporting you with police forces?
None said no. We didn't get as many from certain forces as we wanted to, but when you went downtown during that lead up to the the clean out of the street, you saw police cars from York Region, from Belleville, from Toronto. The mounted unit came up from Toronto.
And when you made these requests, this emergency order wasn't in place. There was no comment about jurisdiction, about police officers coming from Windsor, York to Ottawa?
No jurisdictional issues. In fairness, though, it was the chief and his deputy that made the bulk of the calls to their counterparts. I spoke to a number of mayors, in most instances, to thank them because they'd already pre-committed to the chief. So from that perspective, we were grateful that those municipal police forces came about. There was no need for any swearing in of an Ontario municipal police service, but there was a requirement for us to swear in RCMP officers because they did not have the jurisdiction on municipal matters in Ottawa. And of course, the OPP did not have to swear in. They were the provincial police service.
Okay, perfect.
Perfect. That's it.
Monsieur le Sénateur.
You have 10 seconds left. I'm good. Thank you.
Monsieur le Sénateur.
Senator Harder, 5 minutes.
Merci, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
In the post-event period, can you tell us a little bit about what was the condition of your staff in terms of post-traumatic event? We talked earlier with former Chief Slowly, who spoke of the concern he had for the frontline police and some of the health issues that they experience as a result of the trauma. Mr. Kanalakos, was there an issue with city personnel who were on the front lines and the exhaustion or other health issues that they might have felt afterwards?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we had all of our emergency personnel obviously working. We had firefighters, paramedics still had to get in there, our bylaw officers, we had our traffic people, public works people, we still had our snowplow operators. All of our services were still trying to function in around that area. And I can tell you, even back into our emergency operations center, the people that were embedded with the National Capital Regional Command Center, everybody felt exhausted after that event was over. And I don't know if it's PTSD or what's happened in terms of them psychologically after, but there was a collective exhaustion. We really felt we were, and people have used this expression, we were on our knees after that. People, the emotional trauma from that event was significant for everybody.
I think that's an important observation in that it corroborates the exceptional nature of this event. And this just wasn't a visit to Ottawa of a few people who had who wanted the opportunity to see the Prime Minister, or as they had in their manifesto, to meet with the Senate and instruct us to go to the Governor General's to overthrow the government. This is a serious and unprecedented occupation of Ottawa itself, with lasting results.
Certainly from our perspective, our staff were exhausted. This was 3 weeks in cold weather, whether it police, bylaw, snowplow operators, and they were exhausted. It crippled our tourism industry, which is our third largest industry in Ottawa after government and high tech, and they've been rebuilding because of people's fear of coming to Ottawa. We've started to see an uptick, obviously, in that, and that's helped our local economy. So you have to remember that this is also under the guise of COVID-19 that we're still dealing with, and just getting out of a lockdown. I think, as Mr. Nakvi mentioned, another lockdown began, which was imposed as a result of these people claiming they wanted freedom. Well, they weren't offering any degree of freedom to the thousands, 18,000 people that live in Centertown, the thousands that live in the Byward Market. And, we have story after story of individuals who said they hear a horn honk and they get uptight about that because it was a traumatic experience, and I know some people, scoff at that, but, can you imagine sleeping downtown Ottawa with these horns honking literally 24 hours a day? It was unbearable, and it had to stop.
I know people who moved out as a result of this. Perhaps the last word to Councillor Fleury, if you could give us a little bit of the post-trauma felt in your ward.
There's a number of areas I could obviously go towards. I think it's a number of elements, including every element that the mayor described in terms of noise, in terms of fumes, in terms of the risk. Residents are really asking us, how do we prevent this risk as a city for the future? How can we live downtown? As you know, in Ottawa, we're having an issue with our downtown. The federal workforce has not come back to the downtown. So there's a confidence issue with Ottawa's downtown. There's a business, as the mayor was highlighting, with our tourism partners are saying, we see the reviews, people are asking questions. Is Ottawa safe? Do I book, and is this risk going to continue? So there are areas where our business operators are saying, we're getting these bizarre questions that we never thought. Usually Ottawa is a safe city. Usually we welcome protest, and protests are part of the economy, of the local economy, but they're not impacting the livability for locals.
Thank you.
Merci, Sénateur Harder.
Thank you, Senator Harder. Senator Patterson, you have 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, I wonder if you would allow me to cede my time to Senator Boniface?
J'ai personne objection.
If there are no objections to that, that's fine. Senator? Senator Boniface, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you, Senator Patterson, and we welcome you to the committee. I wanted to come back to the question of jurisdiction, and particularly maybe, Mayor, you can talk about this. The Police Services Act, to my knowledge, it's been a while since I opened it up and looked at it, but would normally, police service of jurisdiction would be Ottawa. If the requirement, so if I use as an investigation as important, not normally would it be a city the size of Ottawa, but if a smaller department had a major case, they could, the Crown could step in and ask that the OPP take over the investigation, as an example. That's within the Act as far as I'm familiar. When you look at it now, in reflection, do you see that there should be a provision in or some agreement between the three levels of government that would look at how you do an integrated command at the front end of an incident like this, that it would be mandatory versus left to the police agencies to decide?
I think that's a very good point, and I think that would be covered under what Mr. Kanellakis indicated would be the post-mortem that we're going to do. And I agree with you. We've got to do it sooner than later, because it's not just we might see one of these incidents happen sooner than later, but it's also people's memory. You know, the longer you wait, the more difficult it is to remember what happened on that specific day or that specific hour and who called who and so on. So certainly, you know, our obligation, particularly Mathieu and I, who are both leaving politics, we want to make sure that our successors are never put in a position where we have this kind of horrific experience where there is a lack of coordination by all three police forces, and you know, we all share the blame. You know, the buck stops with me as mayor, and I take responsibility that we let down the people of Ottawa, and we have to do better.
And maybe to Mr. Kanellakis, at the government level, so I'm thinking your counterparts in the provincial government and at the federal level. Again, is there something that should be, I mean, people would think, the public would think, well, that they would naturally work together. Obviously, in this case, it wasn't necessarily the case. And so should that be something that is either covered by agreement or legislatively?
Yes, I think that's what was evident, and it's been something that we haven't had to deal with necessarily in the past. The only other time I can remember is Corporal Cirillo and the shooting that happened. There is no memorandum of understanding between the federal government and the City of Ottawa in a federal precinct in terms of how to deal with a emergency of this kind of scale. And even at the provincial level, there are mechanisms with their emergency operations and ours back and forth, but there isn't a memorandum of understanding or any kind of documentation or pre-work that's been done to understand how would we come together to lead an incident that escalates and scales up so that we can quickly mobilize. The federal government, and to his credit, Deputy Minister Rob Stewart called me after the first weekend and said we should talk. And I didn't know who Rob Stewart was. And he became a key link for me into the federal government and brought together the deputy minister community with us and police chief, et cetera. And eventually it expanded to the RCMP commissioner, OPP commissioner, et cetera. But that became an ad hoc thing where we came together to discuss situational awareness and what other steps we could take to try and mitigate what was happening. And to me, that's a pretty, from a lessons learned, I've been thinking a lot about these things as it's happened. I think it's a pretty fundamental course of action that we need to have for the nation's capital.
Okay, just on that then, it would be, I suspect, helpful to all of you to understand the role of each of the governments in a situation like this. Because it seems to me that, and document what that is in advance, because there are multiple incidents that were taking place when Ottawa was going on. I think the commissioner of the OPP testified to this today, that he had the whole province, and there were a number of different, we had Winnipeg, we had all kinds of things going. And you can only stretch a provincial police service so far. And like the Ottawa Police Service, they were on their knees when they finished, and we need to recognize that.
Thank you, Senator Boniface. So we've just finished the third round. We'll start the fourth and last round of questions. I'll start with Mr. Brock. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, thank you, Chair. When we talk about takeaways or lessons learned, one of the things I've reflected upon about this particular incident is the extreme naivete demonstrated by so many organizations, from police organizations to government officials to you four gentlemen, specifically Mayor Watson. You all felt that this was going to go away within 48 hours. This was organized for weeks prior to these truckers and their supporters arriving in the city of Ottawa. They were coming from the West Coast. They were coming from the East Coast and everywhere in between. So how could anyone be so naive to think, given that their mandate, which was widely shared across all kinds of social media platforms, that they weren't leaving until all federal mandates were removed, how anyone could think that 48 hours from now, someone who's traveled from Vancouver, British Columbia, would just say, okay, my point's been made, and then return. They were there to speak to a government official. That didn't happen. So I wanted to throw that out for consideration. Now, we've heard on a couple of occasions from my colleague, Mr. Varani, who took two opportunities to describe the actions of a certain member of Parliament. And I listened very carefully to your responses, Mayor Watson, and then clearly your indignation with respect to that member of Parliament was very evident. Comments such as that particular member giving it credibility, it's an insult to the wound. I bet I didn't hear that same indignation when the Prime Minister of this country was the origin, was the genesis for the anger that many people had about mandates. The same Prime Minister who called these people extremists, racists, misogynists, those with unacceptable views, those who don't believe in science, those who take up space. Were you concerned about the Prime Minister using that language, Mayor Watson?
No, what I was concerned with was seeing swastika flags and seeing Confederate
That's not the
flags.
question. Were you concerned about the Prime Minister's language?
No, I wasn't.
Well, obviously not, because you used that same language yourself. You called those protesters yahoos.
Yes.
Those were disgraceful. They were despicable, engaging in unacceptable behavior. The vast majority of these people were not being respectful.
And
they weren't just outsiders, Mayor Watson. These were people who live in your city.
Point of
Mr.
order.
Brock. Madame Bendayan.
The member asked a question and did not allow the witness to answer.
He did answer, and I can...
Le 5 minutes appartient au...
This 5 minutes is belongs to that member. He's lacking respect, says Ms. Bendayan. I agree that if there's a lack of respect, then we'll have to stop things. But I think we can each and every one of us can use our time as we so wish. If it's a 5 minutes speech, it can be a 5-minute speech. But I cannot interrupt the member who has the floor unless there is indeed a lack of respect. So far, I've found the tone a little harsh, but I didn't feel there was a lack of respect. Yeah, but there was a question, says Ms. Bendayan. I'll let Mr. Brock continue his line of questioning.
Yep, thank you. People who were there to support those truckers also include residents of your city. Were they yahoos as well? Were they those who were holding unacceptable views? Were they engaging in unacceptable behavior? I think the answer is obvious. No, they were not. But you had no problem answering the question because it was important for you to set the agenda. It was important for you to maintain your liberal ideology. We all know about your background, Mayor Watson. We know you're a former federal staffer to a Liberal member. We know about your member of parliament status in the province and you were a minister. We know all about that. I bet you didn't critique the Prime Minister when he took a knee when protesters were on the Hill during mid-COVID. You probably said nothing about that. Of course not. You were also criticized.
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order, I just don't understand the relevance of this questioning, and I don't appreciate the tone that the member is taking. He asked for a respectful tone with respect to members of the committee. I think the witnesses also deserve respect in terms of their testimony. He doesn't need to agree with it, but he does need to be disagreeable in terms of the way he's phrasing his question.
If I could just clarify one thing.
One moment, Mr. Watson. There's a point of order. I want to just complete that. I understand your point, Mr. Varani. As I was saying to Ms. Bendayan earlier, I think the tone may be a little harsh, but there's been nothing disrespectful said so far. I'll let Mr. Brock complete. Mr. Brock, you have 1 minute left.
You were criticized after your testimony at the commission by a member of the press. The headline read, "Watson wanted to protect Trudeau. Embarrass Ford during convoy." We've got testimony from your city manager, Mr. Kanalokas, who basically put on record that you were quite hesitant about even engaging in the whole thought about a mediator, because what would that do to Mr. Trudeau's reputation? What would that do to the reputation of the federal government? Your exact words. He was very reluctant. His initial reaction was, we couldn't do that, and thought that doing that was going to put pressure on the federal government in terms of, if we meet with them, someone else would have to meet with them, said Mr. Kanalokas. Doug Ford has been hiding from his responsibility for political reasons, Trudeau said.
Your time is up, Mr. Brock.
La parole est à monsieur.
Mr. Nakvi, you have 5 minutes.
The witness is asking for an opportunity to respond to the speech that was just made towards him, impugning his credibility.
J'ai compris.
I've understood. Mr. Watson, I'll give you a few seconds to answer.
Briefly, Mr. Chair, thank you. Merci. Mr. Brock indicated I'm a former staffer for a Liberal member of Parliament. I was a former staffer for a Conservative member of Parliament. And secondly, we were concerned that Mr. Ford had time to go snowmobiling, but no time to come and visit the second largest city in Ontario, the fourth largest in Canada, when we were at the mercy of this mob that had taken over our city. So, yes, Watson. I'm not happy with the Premier not showing up.
Merci, Monsieur Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. Perhaps you'll continue that answer in the next round. I'll give Mr. Nakvi the floor. Did I say 5? But actually, you have 4 minutes, Mr. Nakvi.
Mr. Chair, and actually, just looking at a news story from April 25th, 2020.
Je m'excuse juste un instant, monsieur.
Just 1 moment, Mr. Nakvi. I'm realizing that I made a mistake. I gave Mr. 5 minutes, Mr. Brock. I'll give you 5 minutes, but the next rounds will be 3 minutes.
Donc, Monsieur Nakvi, pour 5 minutes.
Mr. Nakvi, 5 minutes.
Very much, Mr. Chair. I'm actually looking at an article from April 25th, 2020, where Premier Ford called anti-lockdown protesters at Queen's Park on Saturday as a bunch of yahoos and said that they were selfish and irresponsible for demonstrating against provincial emergency orders in place to slow down the spread of COVID-19. So I'm sure Mr. Brock will direct his comments to the Premier of Ontario as well. Mr. Mayor, I was, you testified at the public inquiry that there were a number of children who had to miss chemo and radiation appointments at CHIO, which is our children's hospital. And I was taken aback by that testimony because I was not, as a resident of the city, I was not aware. And as a father of two young kids who use CHIO often, my heart sank. Can you elaborate on that part of your testimony as to how that happened?
Yeah, and also the hospitals. We have a lot of our healthcare workers, particularly nurses, that come from the province of Quebec, have to travel over our bridge system to get to the Montfort Hospital in the East End or CHIO in the South End. And as you know, most of the bridges were shut down as a result of the challenges, and there was one bridge designated for healthcare workers that they'd have to go through a checkpoint that slowed everything down. So the Montfort had to rent hotel rooms close to the hospital so that they could actually go and sleep over and then meet their shift the next morning or the next evening. Alex Munter, who was the president of CHIO, the Children's Hospitals of Ontario, stated just very recently that I believe it was 13 families had to have their chemotherapy appointments for their children canceled because during that period of time the traffic flow was not going where it should. These are people that were from outside of Ottawa because CHIO serves all of Eastern Ontario, and there was a fear of bringing children into the downtown core. So these are not made-up stories. The president of CHIO is not spinning a tale. These are facts that put the risk of these children, as a result of this behavior of these people who came to protest. And we have nothing against protests. As Steve Kanalakis says, we're very good at welcoming protesters. But this was an occupation of our downtown.
Thank you. Councillor Fleury, if I may ask a personal question, I know that you've spoken about personal impact of this occupation on you and your family's life. If you're comfortable sharing a little bit as to what you went through as being a stellar representative of your community and trying to help them during that crisis.
Yeah, during the after that first weekend, I was one of the first elected members locally to say that we have to go after the funds to go back home. Let's get our life back locally. So I was pretty clear that we have to go to the source of what's keeping folks in Ottawa, and a number of individuals showed up at my house with pickup trucks and flags and threatened. I have a young family at home, and so finally we had to move out. I had to focus. Obviously, I have a young family, so moving them out of the area so that I could focus on the crisis. And as you're well aware, I was hosting daily meetings with all elected members in both my community and in yours. You were part of many of those. We brought all the stakeholders, General Manager Ayotte, we had police representation, we had the hotel, tourism, local BIAs, local community associations. So I had to focus on the crisis and what I could do as an elected member. Certainly not naive to the situation, quite active on the situation. And yeah, I mean, it's an uncomfortable position because I want people to run for office, but when people show up at your house and you have a young family, you do have responsibility as a father.
Yeah, thank you. And gets me emotional thinking about that people went through. But that's one example of so many stories. And I've got emails and emails here that I got from constituents. Some of it you guys are copied too, and I'm sure you received, which is some horrific personal examples of what people went through, because it was not a peaceful protest. It was not a lawful protest. It was an occupation of our city. So thank you both to your public service. Sincerely appreciate it.
Merci, Monsieur Nagvi.
Thank you, Mr. Naqvi. So again, I have the floor. Mr. Green, for 3 minutes. Yeah, 3 minutes.
Oh, but they... 3 minutes. Here we go.
Merci, Monsieur Green.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Mr. Watson, from what I gather, on a number of occasions you've said you were rather close to Chief Slowly in the sense that you had regular communications with him up to a few times a day. You said a few hours apart. That makes sense. What was your reaction when you heard that Chief Slowly wanted to step down?
Well, I was concerned because at the same time, the chair of the police board had decided to sign a contract with another chief, and as I mentioned earlier, this was a situation we had 3 chiefs in 3 days, so I did not support that move, and as a result, the individual who was approached by the police board declined the opportunity. I think he saw what an environment he was getting into.
Merci.
And then, Chief
Mais juste par rapport au...
But with respect to Chief Slowly, we only have 3 minutes. I don't have much time. Do you know why Chief Slowly decided to resign?
Understanding that the Police Services Board did not have confidence in the chief, and that was the reason why he was offered a severance package of some sort, and he stepped down.
OK.
Chief Bell was brought in.
Donc, je comprends.
From what I gather, you're testifying that there was a lack of confidence from this team of officials. You yourself, were you witness of some protests or of the evidence of non-confidence, rather? Or is that something that you heard, someone told you?
No, I didn't, because I was not a member of the Police Services Board, so any of the activity that was taking place in
Qui vous a dit, Monsieur?
Who told you, Mr. Watson, that Chief Slowly was resigning because his team of officials no longer had confidence in him?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Qui vous a dit?
Who told you this?
Sorry, who told me? No, it was the board. The board, the police.
Yeah, mais oui, mais vous n'avez...
Yes, but you're telling me that you did not see anyone say that they had no confidence. My question is simple: who told you that people no longer had confidence in Mr. Slowly?
Well, it was the chair of the board when she came to see me to indicate that the chief was stepping down.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Watson.
Okay. Monsieur Green.
Mr. Green, 3 minutes.
It's somewhat of a revelation for me, Mr. Chair, in the scope of our work to find out that the federal government said it was a non-starter to use aid to civil power. Part of our job is to find out whether or not they had existing legislation in place, powers in place at the different levels of government in order to resolve this without invoking the act. So through you, Mr. Kalinakis, can you just explain, give me a timeline roughly in your recollection when that was raised and what the rationale of the response was?
I don't recall because I don't have it in front of me when it was. It would have been after the It would have been around the second weekend, I would imagine, of the protest that was in that area. There were some councillors that were interested in pursuing that. They were frustrated. I raised the issue to see if it was even going to be a possibility, and it wasn't a long discussion. It was exactly as I said it.
And so would that have been a written request? Is that something that you sent in writing?
No. It was
okay, fair enough. I will note in your affidavit on page 17 that you submitted to the commission, chapter 4, second paragraph, you state that the city requested police resources and inquired what the various levels of government could do in light of existing legislation to put pressure on the protesters. You also noted that you asked the province, in particular, the Deputy Minister of Transportation, whether there was anything that could be done in regards to truckers' insurance or commercial vehicle operators' registration, the CVOR certificates, but the province was not prepared to do anything in this respect. Quote, these are your words in the affidavit. Did the province provide any explanation why they weren't prepared to act under that existing legislation?
No.
Were there, this is, again, another, I think significant point for our committee. Were there other areas at either the provincial level or the federal level that you pursued, sir, both verbally or in writing, that would have used existing legislations to bring this to a resolution?
We weren't naming specific. We weren't specific about the things they could pursue. We were asking what tools would they have available in existing legislation or regulations that could help us.
But in your opinion, I mean, you've listed in your affidavit, you use those two things, the insurance and the commercial vehicle operators registration. Those to me seem very obvious. And is it your opinion, would you agree with me that if the provincial authorities had put pressure under that ministry, under the threat of losing their license, that this thing could have been wrapped up within the first week?
I can't speculate that it would be, but it would have helped.
It definitely would have helped. So those are the only two things that you put requests in, as well as the aids to civil power?
And we asked them for anything else that they could do.
And they came back with nothing?
The province came back with nothing. The federal government didn't have jurisdiction over local trucking, so they couldn't do anything.
Merci, Monsieur Green.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Senator Carignan, 3 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do any of you know Larry Broxson? You know? You know him? Mayor, do you know Larry Broxson? I know he's responsible for security for the PBS. Why do you not return his calls when he calls your office?
Because the appropriate protocol would involve politician to politician, not police to politician. And we referred his call to Mr. Kanalakis' office, who I believe referred it to the Chief Slowly, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Kanalakis.
Pouvez-vous m'expliquer?
Can you explain this to me? I feel there's a great deal of incompetence on the part of the City of Ottawa in this entire thing. You have to design emergency plans. You've admitted there was a mistake. It was a mistake not to have shut down Wellington Street, not to have set barricades there. But you also have to create an emergency plan that identifies infrastructure. From what I gather, this was the first time you heard of a Mr. Broxson. You had no relationship with the parliamentary precinct. You had, in your plan, you had no exchanges, joint committees that would have meant that there would be security, safety, and emergency planning in place. This is just total improvisation. I mean, what is this?
Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, but everything that's just been said is completely incorrect, and I don't agree with any of it. Mr. Broxson is the director of PPS. His people were sitting in the National Capital Regional Command Center. His people are on Intersect, which is an Ottawa Police-led intelligence group. He spoke to Chief Slowly the day that he called Mayor Watson. I had arranged for a call with him on the next morning, but I spoke to Chief Slowly right after he spoke to Mr. Broxson, and Chief Slowly filled me in on all the details that he advised Mr. Broxson about what was happening with the operation. Our emergency plan is there to support. Sometimes we lead it, but in this case, police led it. Our emergency plan is designed to support police. It was a police-led operation. So this isn't a failure of the city enacting its emergency plan. And for Mr. Broxson, I didn't hear all of his testimony in terms of putting it out there that a statement. He never got a call back from the mayor, from the city manager. He wasn't aware of the situational awareness on the ground. I have a hard time believing when he spoke to Chief Slowly, half an hour before Chief Slowly spoke to me, and Chief Slowly told me he briefed him completely on what the situation was on the ground.
And when you'll provide your emergency plan, what are we going to see there about the relationship with Parliament and plans that are implemented or provided to protect Parliament against these types of overflows?
Kanalakis?
A quick answer, Mr. Kanalakis.
Well, it's exactly what I asked I answered earlier. There aren't clear protocols between the city and federal institutions for the national capital, but there are protocols between police, parliamentary precinct, RCMP, and OPP. That's where the protocols, so they're strong, but the city doesn't have institution-to-institution protocols with the federal government.
Merci, Sénateur Carignan.
Thank you, Senator Carignan. Unfortunately, your time is up. And our last speaker this evening, Senator Harder, you have 3 minutes.
I'm going to share my time with Senator Boniface.
You want to share? You
want to share 3 minutes? A minute and a half each? But I'll do this quickly. I'll start quickly.
Mr. Watson, it seems in the discussion that it was almost like the province of Ontario wasn't willing to cooperate as long as Chief Slowly was in office, that the cooperation seemed miraculously available once he was out. Am I subscribing to the notion of something going on?
I can't answer that because I don't have an answer on that. I think there was concern raised, I know, at the provincial level and the federal level in terms of our ability to do this on our own and where the plan was going to eventually end. At the end of the whole process, it worked out. No one was killed. No one was seriously injured. The area was cleaned out. A number of people were arrested, hundreds of charges laid, but I don't have the information that would back you up.
I just wanted to close off the last minute and a half on the risk of counter-protest. Mr. Fleury, from your riding and others, and I know people who lived in the area, they were getting very impatient. Was there a plan in place on any risk of counter-protests? For instance, if the police didn't do something, the community members were going to.
Maybe Kim could speak to it. I know there were a number of counter-protests, particularly at Riverside Drive in the South End. The police discouraged that because it took resources away from the main problem. But at the end of the day, I admire the individuals who stood up to a lot of pickup trucks and they got them out of the area. And there were other walks done through the community in Centertown. Again, we don't want to see anyone in a situation like that put themselves at risk.
It puts the officers at risk as well.
Absolutely, yes, and it spreads the resources. We're already thin, even thinner.
Mr. Ayotte, do you want to just close out with your comments?
Sure, thank you. I think the mayor covered it quite well, is that we did have plans. We had communication plans to try and communicate to the public to not have counter-protests because it does take police resources away from where they need to be. And it is dangerous. It's dangerous for them. And we did see a few. However, they were managed by the police.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Sénateur Boniface.
Thank you, Senator Boniface. I would like to thank you, Mr. Fleury, Mr. Kanellakos, Mr. Ayotte, Mr. Watson, for your appearance tonight. This brings our evening our questioning to an end. I'd like to remind the members, that next week our meeting will be on Thursday, November 3rd, from 6:30 to 9:30. We'll be hearing from Commissioner Carrick from the Ontario Provincial Police, and Mr. Steve Bell, he was the interim chief for the City of Ottawa Police, and Patricia Ferguson, also interim chief. Is that all right with everyone? No comments? Adjourned. Thank you. Good evening.